Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming out this morning. My name is Jim. I'm the Secretary for the New Mexico Environment Department, and my colleague here, the Secretary for Energy and Minerals, Sarah Cottrell-Props, is here as well. And we're going to kick things off. And before we begin, I see a number of folks in the room, if you will, a number of dignitaries who came in. And I just wanted to acknowledge some of the folks who came out as your representatives, as elected officials, and others, so that you're aware of who's here, and then during breaks and opportunities that you may want to connect with somebody, you know who's here. First, I wanted to thank Mayor Janway. So we had a little bit of, we didn't know that this was going to be such a, well, we probably didn't know that this was going to be a big topic for the communities we're moving into and having these meetings at. But we were across the street, as many of you know, and we moved here to accommodate, and that's through the hospitality of Mayor Janway to facilitate that for us. I didn't see him, but if he's here, thank you. All right. Secondly, a number of your state representatives and senators may be in the room. So I saw Representative Scott, Brown, and Townsend, I believe. So thank you. I see you all there. Thank you for coming. I don't know if Senator Kernan is here, but I just want to mention her name because she's been such a great supporter of the oil and gas industry and working well with us. And just want to mention her name as well. Assistant Land Commissioner of Minerals and Resources, William Kessler, is here. So someone from the State Land Office, if you need to talk to Jordan. And then Senator Udall's office, I believe, is here. Thank you for coming. I don't know if any other individuals from the congressional delegation are here, and I apologize if I haven't seen you yet, but again, thank you to Senator Udall's office for coming. And then lastly, most importantly for me, is that our staff is here. So we have a number of staff folks from Energy and Minerals as well as the New Mexico Environment Department that I just want to point out so that, again, if you have questions about things you're hearing throughout the morning, at least you have an opportunity to talk with us. So we have Sandra Ely from New Mexico Environment Department, as well as Liz Hume, who's probably still, she's all the way in the back setting up chairs still, and some other folks from Energy and Minerals. Matt Hayden, our PIO, is here, who has a connection to Carlsbad as well. And then Adrian Sandoval, the Oil Conservation Division Director. Susan is here, the PIO from Energy and Minerals. Is there anybody else here? I think that's, so we have a lot of folks here. A lot of folks who can answer questions. With that, thank you for caring enough about this topic to come out and be with us this morning to hear what we're proposing in terms of stakeholder engagement and moving forward in the role context. Your participation in these meetings, your active participation in the Q&A and in the comments is really just going to make this process inclusive of every view and everybody. So we're really appreciative that we've had great turnout in all our meetings, including Carlsbad. As you know, in this community, the oil and gas industry is extremely important to the state of New Mexico. It's important to our governor, it's important to us. And we want to do everything we can to hear from you, to move forward in a positive direction. It is not punitive in any way to the oil and gas industry, but is supportive to our communities. And again, the engagement is really where the integration of these opportunities for us to hear from you to hear from us is really the public engagement we're looking for. So with that, thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague who's going to continue with the welcome.
Secretary, again, my name is Sarah Cottrell-Props. I'm the Secretary of Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources. I want to add my thanks to you for coming out today and giving some of your valuable time to this important topic. We're really looking forward to your input today. That's what these meetings are about. This is the third one that we've had so far, and we have another one to go. We were in Farmington last week, and then in Albuquerque, and then we're in Carlsbad, and then we're going to be out at the Navajo Nation's request out at Councilor Chapter next week. And this is really early stages of contemplating how we address some of the methane emission issues in our state. That's why we're having these meetings. We haven't written a rule yet. We haven't decided exactly what we're going to do. We want to take it slow and steady and make sure we get enough input from you and from the industry and affected stakeholders so that this is sensible and does in fact enable the continued thriving of the oil boom here in the Permian and as well as production in the San Juan Basin. So thank you again for coming. Here's a little bit of what to expect today in terms of the order of operations. We're going to start with a presentation that we're giving in all of the locations about our respective jurisdictions and the stakeholder process that we're going to use. And then we're going to take about an hour for questions and answers about the presentation and anything that raises. Then we'll take a short break, and then we'll come back and we'll do the public comment portion of the day where we take 2 minutes and everybody who signed up to speak, we'll go through, we'll call out names so we can tee you up and then hear from you on your perspectives and what you'd like to share with us today. We'll ask the elected officials to go first at the beginning of that public comment period as a courtesy, but then we'll hear from folks. Is there anything I'm missing on order of operations? All right, well, thank you. Let's get started with the presentation with Sandra and Adrian, and Jim and I are just going to step right down here, but again, thank you for coming.
Man, we have a flag up there. Would it be okay if we said the pledge of allegiance before you did anything?
Yeah.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I'm in the dark up here. Not that I'm really in the dark all the time, but we want you to be able to see the screen well. We'll turn the lights back up once we move to the question and answer period. As Secretary Probst stated, this is a PowerPoint presentation that we provided in all the jurisdictions that all the cities that we've done outreach to so far, and it's really just kind of an overview of our plan to address methane in the state. And as the Secretary mentioned, this is our strategy for the day. Some of you may have been to our open house last night. We wanted to provide an opportunity for folks that had a 9-to-5 job to come in after work and be available to answer questions for them. And so that was what that was about. It was nice to see a good turnout for that. We will go through the presentations and provide an opportunity for clarifying questions. We ask that you save your statements for the input portion of the presentation so that folks who really do have questions about the presentation have an opportunity to ask them. Then after the break, we'll provide the input opportunity. We are asking folks to keep their comments to 2 minutes. There's a lot of you here. We may not get to all of you, and if we don't, there will still be an opportunity to provide your input online. So our methane strategy is part of the governor's executive order on climate change and greenhouse gases. This is one strategy for reducing greenhouse gases in the state. But as you'll hear from us, there are many reasons to move forward with the methane strategy, not just reducing greenhouse gases, but also reducing ozone pollution and reducing waste. And in that executive order, the governor asked us to establish rules as soon as possible to prevent waste and pollution in a way that is applicable statewide and is an enforceable mechanism. And as we move forward with our methane strategy, we have 4 tenets, things that we will keep in mind as we move forward. And first and foremost is good science. We need to base our decisions on facts. What's happening in the field, what the experts are telling us, what the papers are telling us. the good reports that are coming out on oil and gas. We want to base our decisions and our documents on what really works and is backed by good science. We also want to consider innovation. We have been inundated with folks coming to us telling us all the strategies they have for monitoring, reporting, for reducing methane emissions in the field, and we want to hear that. We want to figure out how to include innovation in our process as we move forward. We also want to go through this process in a collaborative effort, which is one of the reasons we're starting with these stakeholder meetings. We want to bring you all into the process. We want to tell you all what we're thinking, how we want to move forward with this. And so it's real important that you're here. I appreciate you all being here. Your engagement will help us get this right. So I'm so glad that you all took the time to be here this afternoon. And then lastly, as we move forward, we need to consider compliance. So we may be developing strategies for reducing methane emissions, and we need to make sure that they are applied industry-wide. We want to level the playing field. We want to make sure that if one company is doing this, that they're all doing it, and that they're following the rules as they should. So compliance is an important tenet for us as well. This slide kind of shows kind of our overall strategy on working towards methane reductions and the collaborative processes that we were just talking about, or I was just talking about. First of all is this stakeholder process. As we mentioned, this is our third very well-attended meeting in the state. And after we finish this process, we're going to start down the path of bringing together experts both from the NGO community and the oil and gas community, academia, and technology companies to help us consider how to move forward with methane reductions on what we're calling the MAP, the Methane Advisory Panel. After that panel does their work, we're going to have a meeting and a discussion about the impacts to the communities, both economic impacts as well as public health impacts around methane reduction, methane in the field. And then we're going to start from November this year on our regulatory process. That's at the point where we're going to start considering what rules might look like. Whose jurisdiction would some of these requirements fall under? Would it fall under Adrian's shop in OCD? Would it fall in our shop under the Environment Department? So that's kind of what it looks like. If you're looking for a timeline, this is the best we have right now. Lots of stakeholder engagement, then starting to look at rulemaking at the end of the year, and then probably we wouldn't go forward for authorization on any rules until sometime next year. I want to do sound check. Can people in the back hear me? Yeah, great. Great. What's it? Oh, barely. Oh, I can't hear you. Okay. Okay. I'll speak up. Yeah, secretary, or industrial secretary. I'll get back there and see what he can do. Is that better? Okay, great. As mentioned, methane is a potent greenhouse gas, and EPA considers it 25 times more potent, more forcing for climate change than carbon dioxide, which is one of the reasons we need to address it. And that's on a 100-year time frame. If you look at a shorter time frame, it's even more potent. It's also the second most prevalent greenhouse gas emitted in the U.S. It compromises, it compromises about 60% of methane emissions in New Mexico. What did I say? Oh, and 60% of methane emissions come from oil and gas in New Mexico. Next slide, Susan. This will explain it a little bit better. So on this slide, we have overall greenhouse gas emissions for the U.S. and for New Mexico. And you can see in New Mexico, about 60% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from carbon dioxide. It's a little bit larger nationwide, and 32% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from methane. So on this next slide, we're going to look at that methane piece of the pie and see what the sources of those methane emissions are. Susan? And what we see here on the right, you see that 62% of the methane emissions in New Mexico are coming from the oil and gas industry. There are also other sources of methane emissions, and we'll be looking at those eventually, but right now we're looking at the biggest piece of that pie and trying to figure out how we reduce methane emissions in the oil and gas industry and still have a vibrant, efficient industry. And we think we can do that with the help of you all. Nationwide, you see that methane emissions are only 31% come from oil and gas. It's not surprising New Mexico has so much of the methane emissions coming from oil and gas because we have such a vibrant industry. Susan.
So Sandra is at the Environment Department, and I represent the Oil Conservation Division, which sits under Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources. So we're going about this process together in a kind of collaborative framework, but we've both been charged at controlling methane from the oil and gas industry. But we both have two kind of different pieces of this puzzle, whereas the Environment Department has a emissions, air quality mindset. The OCD regulates waste of a resource from the oil and gas industry. So we both have kind of different pieces of this puzzle, but ultimately, the OCD is coming at this from a waste perspective. So from that perspective, last year, oil and gas companies reported to us in a monthly report over 36 billion cubic feet of gas that was vented and or flared over that year. So that's gas that was flared, vented into the atmosphere, and then reported to us. We also recognize that that number is likely underreported, and that the actual number is higher than is represented right there. And really that equates to approximately $10 million of lost revenue to the state of New Mexico. That was calculated using the current natural gas price of a couple months ago, and based on that volume that we have. I think we've all heard a lot of different sources of what the methane and emissions problem is within New Mexico. There are reports from EDF, there are reports from industry associations, there's a report from NOAA, there's a report from NASA. They're all different types of reports, and there are tons of different numbers out there. And what we're really focusing on is the numbers that we have and that are reported to us by the oil and gas industry. And that's what that 36 billion cubic feet is. And that's the number that we're going to be basically working off of in order to show that we have made reductions to that. So as I mentioned a second ago, we're moving about this in a very collaborative framework. We both, us and the Environment Department, have been charged with addressing the methane issue. But we are two separate departments, and we have two separate sets of statutes and jurisdictions. So how we're going to be doing this is looking at this as a collaborative framework. OCD sits under MNERD, and MNERD operates under the Oil and Gas Act. That was written in 1935. It's basically what all of our rules and regulations come from and where we get our jurisdiction from. We look at waste of a resource. So when gas is vented and flared, the state doesn't collect severance taxes on it and currently doesn't collect royalties on that either. So that's where the waste of a resource is, because New Mexico is no longer able to use that as a revenue stream.
And the New Mexico Environment Department would, as Adrian said, regulates pollution. We don't necessarily regulate waste. Our enabling statute is the Air Quality Control Act, and the authority that adopts our regulations or would move forward with any proposed regulations is the Environmental Improvement Board. I do want to stress the collaboration piece, though. I worked in the State Environment Department for about 20 years and have never seen so much of energy and minerals over that whole time as I have over the last few months. We are working hand in glove to make sure that whatever we do to address methane, doesn't provide an undue burden on industry, doesn't duplicate regulations, doesn't leave any gaps, and doesn't have any conflicts in the rule. That's really important to us, and that's why we're meeting so frequently to get this right. Right, so we will be regulating methane emissions from the oil and gas industry. I'm going to talk in a little bit about how we do that through volatile organic compounds. Our enabling state statute is the Air Quality Control Act, and the proposed rules would go before the Environmental Improvement Board, which hasn't been formed yet, but should be ready to go end of this month.
So under IMNRD, we operate under the Oil Conservation Commission. That's essentially our hearings body. It consists of 3 different commissioners, myself, there is a designee from the land office, as well as another person who is nominated from the committee and he's a professor at New Mexico Tech and has worked in the oil and gas industry and is a petroleum engineer and has deep experience and knowledge of the oil and gas industry, so he's a great resource. Ultimately, all of the rules that we develop are going to be going through this Oil Conservation Commission to be finalized, and so a draft rule will be proposed, and then it will be set for a date in the public notice, and there will be a public hearing that is held and through this commission, and then the commissioners will vote on and either move forward or not with the rule.
So the way we would regulate methane is by regulating the volatile organic compounds. As all you guys know, because you're in the field, that volatile organic compounds have methane and they have other toxic pollutants like xylene and benzene. And so once we regulate those VOCs as a package, we'll be reducing them, we'll be reducing methane and those other toxic emissions. One of the key things, though, for us in the Air Quality Bureau is making sure your air is healthy to breathe. And so in tackling VOCs, which is a precursor, volatile organic compounds plus oxides of nitrogen can form smog, can form ozone. And so if we're reducing those VOCs, we'll be reducing smog as well.
And again, for the OCD, we're really looking at the waste of a resource part, and the waste of a resource that can be utilized by the state of New Mexico as a revenue stream. As I mentioned before, it's about $10 million that was calculated off of that 36 billion cubic feet that was vented and flared last year. And currently this year, we're on track for 2019 to exceed that number as well. So, you know, at that point when it's vented and flared, the state is no longer able to collect, or is currently not able to collect severance tax, and is currently does not collect royalties on it.
So the next couple of slides deal with permitting and jurisdiction, and we found in talking with the public that they had a lot of questions about how do you permit on tribal lands, how do you permit on state lands, and you know, how does permitting work? And so it's all part of the whole methane strategy picture. So we put in a few slides to talk about that. This slide up here demonstrates the jurisdictional boundaries, and you see the orange is tribal lands, the white is private lands, blue is state lands, and the green is all federal lands. And this nice table kind of demonstrates where most of the oil and gas wells are, or the percentage of oil and gas wells on each of those jurisdictions, mostly being on federal lands. The other thing this slide shows you is where the active well sites are in the state. And here we are down here. All the brown spots are active oil wells. We've got some gas wells in purple. And then up in the northwest, in the San Juan Basin, there are a few brown spots, but it's mostly gas wells up there. If you are interested in seeing more of our methane map, you can go to the Environment Department. We have a very cool methane map with a number of layers that you can look at and play with. But this is just one example of some of the good information that's coming off that website. Next slide. So how do we issue air permits on state land, tribal land, private land, and federal land? Well, essentially, it's all the same. Any source of emission that exceeds our threshold must come in and get a permit from us, whether you're on state, private, or federal lands. It doesn't matter. I just want to emphasize, we have no authority, no jurisdiction on tribal lands. The tribes handle that themselves along with their partnership with EPA.
So this kind of details out how OCD does permits to drill, which we call APDs. For both state land and private land, we have the same process. We permit the wells and have the regulatory jurisdiction over that. For federal land, BLM initially approves the APD, and then it's sent over to the OCD for a kind of final review and sign-off. But we do not have jurisdiction over tribal lands. That falls to either the tribe or to the BLM.
So oil and gas industry, or any source that emits more than 10 tons per year, is required to come see us prior to construction. You can move dirt, but you can't lay a foundation. So they've got to come see us before they can do anything out there. The threshold for volatile organic compounds, though, for actually receiving a permit that requires all the conditions of monitoring, reporting, etc., is 100 tons per year. That's for volatile organic compounds. It's lower for other pollutants. And for every permit application we get before that permit is issued, public notice is requirement, so the public is notified about that process. Before a permit can be issued, that pollutant source must demonstrate compliance with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Those are health-based standards. So if a single source can't demonstrate that it won't be protective of those NACs, then we cannot issue a permit. We also don't just consider that single source when the modeling is done to demonstrate compliance with these health-based standards. We look at surrounding sources as well. It's a cumulative impact analysis that needs to be done. There are plenty of requirements for those sources depending on the size. As many of you may know, we may have some environmental professionals in the room. There's lots of monitoring and reporting requirements. We also go out into the field to inspect these facilities to make sure that the regulations are being met. And if they aren't being met, then we move forward with NOVs and penalties, and most importantly, trying to assure compliance in the future for those facilities. So we permit volatile organic compounds. We allow industry to pollute up to a certain point where they can, as long as they can demonstrate compliance with the ambient air quality standards. And as you can see from this chart, these are in pounds. These units are in pounds. In Eddy County, we permitted about 91 million pounds in 2018. And in Lee County, about 58 million pounds. So we allow that to happen. That's part of the permit, and that's the responsibility of industry to make sure that they're not exceeding those permits. However, we do have exceedances. You know, you have upsets out there in the field. Sometimes it's allowed under the regulation because you can't help it. Other times it's not. It's just an exceedance of a permit. And what we're also seeing in Lee, Eddy, and San Juan County is about 2 million pounds of excess emissions have happened in 2018, and that's fairly consistent. So we permit it, but we also have certain sources that are going above their permit levels, and we need to take enforcement action on those so that we can bring those sources down, bring those emissions down. And I just wanted to give you kind of an example of what 2 million pounds means. It means about 10 of these natural gas plants. That's a major source. So it's about 10 of those. So it's not trivial. It may only look like 1%, but it's something that we have to address. We have to do a better job as an agency in helping industry bring those emissions back below the permit levels, because they haven't been modeled to demonstrate compliance with ambient standards, and we haven't collected fees on those sources.
So just to walk through the process for OCD as well, and this is specific for permitting a well. We have other kind of application processes, but this is mostly specific for permitting a well. So prior to construction, you are required to obtain an APD, which is a permit to drill, from the OCD. 60 days after completion, you do have a rule in place that says you will not vent and you will not flare any gas. The caveat to that is there are a list of exceptions to this rule. And what ends up happening is that operators operate within the exceptions of the rule, and OCD tends to always grant those exceptions. And we recognize this is a process that has to change on the OCD's end, as well as a regulatory change that needs to be made for this rule. So also after you have gotten an APD, you also have to get a permit basically to transport your production off of the site. And so then what that really drives is some of our reporting process. And the reporting process is where we've gotten the numbers that we have put up on the slides today of that 36 billion cubic feet. So every month operators have to report a handful of items. Some of those are what your production was for the month in both oil, or for both oil and for gas, as well as what are the volumes of vented and flared gas during that month. And so that's where we pull all of that data. And we also, as part of the process, to get an exception to our venting and flaring rule, you do have to submit a request up front. It's called our C-129 form, which a lot of people are familiar with. So you submit that request to be granted an exception to the no vent and flare rule, and then we will either approve or deny that exception request. So I think this is just a really good graphic, and it helps us kind of understand what has happened in the oil and gas industry over the past 10 years. This is specifically for New Mexico, and we have actually March numbers up here, but from what I saw yesterday, I think May was now the top production month for both oil and gas in New Mexico. So we've now exceeded those numbers up there, but it really just shows the huge trend and spike up in the industry. A lot of that is due to the production down here in the Permian, and a lot of the new technologies that have come online that makes drilling more efficient. So here's a little bit of a larger breakdown of our venting and flaring numbers, and kind of where that 36 billion number came from. So this, to kind of start off with, this number is in 1,000 cubic feet. And so in 2016, you can see that we've gone up. In general, in 2017, the numbers went down a little bit, and we're not exactly sure what that's attributed to. However, the number for 2018 shot back up, and the numbers for 2019 are again trending up quite a bit higher than that 36 billion number. Another really important thing to note is that this number is in 1,000 standard cubic feet, whereas the number that Sandra in the Environment Department uses is in pounds. So you can't just take the graph and the chart that the Environment Department has and the chart that we have and directly equate them. Those numbers don't match. This is a volume versus theirs is a mass. So it just kind of a note, these don't directly equate, but it does show kind of the volume of the issue that we're looking at right now.
So the State Air Quality Control Act requires the Environment Department to move forward with a plan for reducing VOCs and oxides of nitrogen, or NOx, once we start to get close to those health-based ambient air quality standards. And we are. We're within the 95th percentile in certain parts of the state. There are 7 counties that we are looking at, 7 counties that are approaching, bumping up against those ambient standards, and they are Leonetta County, Chavez County, Rio Arriba, San Juan, and Bernalillo. We do not have jurisdiction in Bernalillo. It is its own air quality program, so they are addressing their air quality issues there. And we know in Doña Ana, which is one of the 7 counties, that most of the ozone pollution there is from transport up from Mexico. But, so it's our responsibility to look at these 5 other counties and figure out what's going on there and see how we can reduce VOCs and methane. We're doing that through a very robust stakeholder process. Again, I'm glad you're here and engaged in that stakeholder process. And then we will work with industry, local environmentalists, national environmentalists to develop rules over the next year or so. So we're currently gathering information related to ozone. The science of ozone is fairly complex. It can require some very detailed modeling, and so we're evaluating that. We're looking at the health impacts. We know that ozone can exacerbate heart and lung disease. It's known to exacerbate asthma and cause asthma attacks. We're looking at our monitoring data, looking at that very closely. You can also go online if you want to look at our monitoring data. We've got near real-time data online if you want to go to the Environment Department website. We're also looking at what sources are causing that, both point sources, which are things that come out of the stack, and maybe non-point sources, which are more vague, more spread out over a broader area. So what are all the sources that are causing ozone? Oil and gas is only one of them. Next slide. So we're, again, seeking feedback from our stakeholders after we've had a good, robust stakeholder process and we start on the rule writing language. We'll also come back to the stakeholders after we have draft rules. We will go before the Environmental Improvement Board to request that they adopt the proposed rules. This slide has a number of items that we have to present to the board. The Air Quality Control Act doesn't allow us to just say, hey, EIB, will you adopt this rule? We have to present evidence on the health impacts, social impacts, the economic impacts. We have to evaluate the efforts of the sources to reduce emissions prior to implementation of the rule, and we have to even consider the remaining useful life of those sources. So there's a number of things that we have to present to the board as we move forward, and we fully intend to do that because it's in our Air Quality Control Act. In the meantime, prior to going to the board, and always, we are committed to enforcing the rules that are on the books. We know we can do a better job in bringing down some of those excess emissions that we talked to. We need to work with industry to get those emissions down to the permitted levels.
So for our process, we are under the requirements of the Oil and Gas Act, which was written in 1935. It has been amended a couple times since, and currently it reads basically that we are charged with preventing waste, protecting correlative rights, and protecting public health and the environment. The oil and gas basically prohibits waste from production, and that's really where we're coming in with this rule and trying to get advantage of. In order to prevent waste, as I mentioned earlier, we have this no venting, no flare rule, but it as a lot of our rules were written at a very different time. They were written with a very different industry in mind, and we recognize that these need to be updated and written so that it's very clear and concise, both for the people who are regulated and for staff of the OCD, so that we know how to interpret our own rules and it's very clear and we can do it consistently. So kind of our process is going to be that we are going through the stakeholder process. We're going hand in hand with the Environment Department. We're here today. We've hit a handful of venues already, and I really appreciate everybody coming out today, particularly during your work day. And so we will be seeking feedback from a lot of different stakeholders, and we're on that process right now. After kind of that process has concluded for its first round, we will kind of take a step back, take all the information that we've received from all of the different various stakeholder groups, and we will draft a rule. So that rule, once it is drafted, you petition the Oil Conservation Commission, which is our hearing body, to be put on the docket, and a public notice will be sent out so that everybody knows when this hearing is. And we will go through the commission, and they will vote on this draft rule, whether to move forward with it or not. At the end of the day, any rules and decisions that go through the commission can be appealed to the New Mexico Court of Appeals. So again, really just reiterating, this is a very collaborative process. We have the luxury of not being the first to do this. Other states have gone before us, the federal government has gone before us, and it really kind of helps see what has worked and what hasn't worked. What we know definitely does not work is if we move forward separately in our own paths and write two rules in a vacuum, not understanding what the other group is doing. We have similar jurisdictions in places and very different in others, which means we have some overlapping components, and what we really don't want to do is create duplicative rules that make it very confusing and hard for the industry to understand how to operate and to comply with those rules. We also don't want to create kind of mutually exclusive rules, and what I mean by that, for example, would be, so with an inert in the OCD, we see waste of any variety in an equal light. So if you're flaring it, we see that as a waste. If you're venting it, we see that as a waste. Whereas in the Environment Department, they're looking at the global warming potential and air emissions, and in their light, they see flaring as a better alternative than venting. That being said, we could go forward in our own little boxes and create a rule that's mutually exclusive and has conflicting rules. That's 100% what we do not want to do, and why we are taking the time and really putting this effort in up front so that that doesn't happen. A handful of things that we really want out of this rule: it needs to be achievable and measurable. So, at the end of the day, we have to know if this rule has been successful. So it has to be a measurable metric. It has to be durable, which is why we are putting it into a rule instead of doing, say, guidance or something like that. We want to create regulatory certainty for everybody. You need to know how to operate and what lines to stay within so that you're in compliance. It's a very important piece of this, and we don't want to create overlapping, confusing regulations so that the regulated community knows exactly what to do to be in compliance. We also really want to promote technology and innovation. Again, we've had the luxury of not going first on this, and we've seen how stringent some of the other rules have been on the technology that has been written specifically into the rule, which means in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, when there's all this new technology out there that can do something more efficiently and effectively, it's very hard to use that new technology that's going to make it easier and maybe more cost effective, etc. So we are trying to find ways to kind of write this rule to take technology into consideration and move forward with an end result in mind, but possibly some flexibility in how you get to that end result. We also want to ensure compliance mechanisms. At the end of the day, there has to be a compliance component to this, and that comes out in things like record keeping and reporting requirements. As we mentioned at the beginning of this, nothing has been drafted. We are literally on step 1, and there are 10 steps to this process. So we don't know what that looks like, but these are things that we will ensure that are in the rules that we will be drafting. So for this rulemaking, we will be looking at 2 kind of industry sectors within the natural gas kind of production chain. We will be looking at upstream emissions, so emissions from production sites, and we will be looking at the midstream component, so compressor stations and gas plants. After you've really gone through those, that part of the value chain, that's where this rule will end. We will be looking at a lot of different sources for this rulemaking: tanks, pneumatics, flaring, liquids unloading. You name it, we're going to be looking at all of these processes. We're also going to be looking at things like infrastructure. Where are there gaps? How do we promote infrastructure development? Because we recognize that a lot of the time people are venting and flaring because the infrastructure is possibly not there. We also understand that there are operational requirements, or like things within operational situations where you have to vent or you have to flare. And so we want to create a rule that takes those operational considerations into account. We also recognize that the state has different kind of operating scenarios. The Northwest is very unique from the Permian, and one rule may not fit all. So one size may not fit all for this. So we're looking at different scenarios for this rulemaking as well, to take things like stripper wells into account. If you do not have a high potential to emit, maybe the restriction shouldn't be the same for you if you can only emit a lower level versus a higher level of methane. So, we're looking at a lot of different scenarios. We want to make sure this fits everybody. We have an end goal in mind. We have to meet that end goal, right? But how we get there is what we're still trying to figure out, and we want to make sure that the industry is still able to thrive while meeting these end results. So in moving forward, we are developing what is called a methane advisory panel. We're calling it the MAP for short because it's a mouthful. It's going to be consisting of technical stakeholders, so from oil and gas companies and representatives from some of the environmental organizations. So we have sent out letters basically to a handful of organizations, both IKNM, NMOGA, and some national and local NGO groups, and to provide us with a list of people to nominate for this map. And so what the map is, it's going to be a very in-depth, roll up your sleeve, let's get to work process. This is not a process where we're going to sit and wonder, should we be keeping it in the ground? That is 100% not what this process is. The methane is already out there, right? So how do we reduce it? It's going to be looking at each of these categories. One day we're going to have a meeting on tanks. Another, we're probably going to look at pneumatics. Another day we're looking at separators. Another day we're going to be looking at flaring. Another day is infrastructure. And what we're doing is trying to bring as many technical experts into the room to dive into the science and technology behind this, how people operate, what are the challenges, how do we do this and make it usable and workable for a lot of the people who are in this room. And that's exactly what this meeting is going to be about. It's not going to be sitting there and wondering what's the path forward. We're not going to pontificate about anything. We are moving forward. We are diving in. We are meeting every other week for basically 8 hours. It is a very in-depth process. And we also expect that there will probably have to be side groups because for a lot of these categories, 4 hours isn't going to cut it for a tank to discuss everything in the world of tanks. So we're probably going to have side groups where we bring in more technical experts and possibly technology companies and possibly academics and other kind of stakeholders to the table to figure out what regulating a tank means. And at the end of this whole very in-depth process, we will be developing what we're calling kind of an options paper. We're not going to be developing the rule in this group. So I want to state that up front. This is not a rule drafting work group. This is a rule options work group. This is, at the end of the day, we may have 6 different options for tanks. We're laying out all the options, we're laying out the foundation, and then what will happen after that is basically OCD and Environment Department will take a step back, we'll take all of this information into consideration, and that's when we'll start kind of with the rule drafting. But I wanted to make kind of very clear what the map is and what the intention of it is. I think I basically already talked through this slide as well. This just, again, lists all of that. The meetings are going to start very soon. They'll be starting in August. And, I know that industry has been very helpful and willing to work with us, and we're very excited to kind of bring everybody to the table and really start to dive into this. Because the engagement and the stakeholder process up front is what's going to make a successful rule. So So this is just, again, kind of listing where we have been. It was maybe slightly more helpful when we were at the first meeting, but this is completing the meetings. We do have a meeting on Monday next week at Councilor Chapter, and we met with all Pueblo Council of Governors as well. So we have been doing the government-to-government consults along with these public meetings. We also have committed to coming back. So, you know, as I said, we're at step 1 of this process. This is going to be a process for everybody, and we right now don't know how long it's going to take. So we have committed to coming back when we're a little bit further along in this process so that there's another piece of stakeholder engagement, because again, this is going to be critical for the success of this role. So here is a link up top. Everything we're doing is going to be posted there. So this presentation right now that we're presenting is already posted there. There is a opportunity, or there's a button on there so that you can also provide public input. So today, if we don't have the opportunity to get everybody's public input statements, there's also an opportunity to do that on the portal. We will keep kind of everything going and up there, and we want this process to be as transparent as it can be. You know, we think that's really important, and that's a kind of tenet that the governor is really pushing for all of the state, is to make sure that anything that the state government is doing is as transparent for the public as possible. So everything will be up at this link. This link you can also find back on those boards. Those boards have all of these slides, and you can go over there, and if you want to take a picture of it or write it down. But that's where you'll be able to kind of see where we are, what we've done, and where we're going forward to. We also have the contact information for both Susan Torres, who is the PI, or the Public Information Officer for MNERD, and then Maddie Hayden, who is the Public Information Officer for the Environment Department. And then you have my contact information as well as Sandra's. So we, in general, will be the leads for the stakeholder engagement process, at least up and through the rule, or when we start rule drafting. So if you have questions, concerns, want to be involved in the process, things like that, Sandra and I are the ones who can reach out to. We have done as much as humanly possible to take every meeting and every phone call and every email and really be as engaged with people as possible. We think that's super critical. And also, with that being said, if you are not on the map, the map is not the only opportunity right now for engagement. We, again, have taken so many meetings on this topic. If your company is not involved and wants to be, reach out to us. There's not really a wrong way to provide us with feedback or to work through this process with us. We want to have as much stakeholder engagement as possible up front. So if your company is not involved in that, or you're with a private organization that wants to be involved as well, reach out to us. We are kind of happy to facilitate some of that. And so with that,
So let's see, it's about 9:35. We'd like to take an hour for questions. And I think what we'll just do is people have clarifying questions. Again, we like to save statements for the input section, so if people have clarifying questions about what they just heard, or we can answer those for you. And I think the way we'll do this, if you just raise your hand and we'll go back and forward. Hopefully we'll be able to hear you and you can just speak up. If not, we can activate this mic. And we may end up repeating the question for the translator too. So, and to make sure everybody hears it. So here's the question. Where is it?
No.
Where is it? There's a mic back inside.
person as well as me. The question is, methane is obviously no longer methane after it has been flared. So I'm wondering, why are you lumping vented and flared together when the flared is not methane anymore?
So I can answer that. So there are a couple components to that. This rule for us, for MNERD, for OCD, is about preventing waste. And as I mentioned during the presentation, waste for us is seen equally through venting and flaring and leaks and other things. So for us, for our particular jurisdiction, it's all the same. It's all resources that the state is currently not able to utilize as a revenue. You know, there also, you can get into intricacies of, as you're flaring, there can be incomplete combustion. So flares can still be a source of methane.
Thank you. My question has to do with the timing of developing the strategy. There were comments I heard that talked about this needing to be done as being done quickly. It is my opinion that state government is not at its best when it acts quickly. Could you help me understand the timetable? Where does that come from? Who is driving the hurry up and get it done? Thank you.
So the governor's executive order sets some greenhouse gas emission reduction mandates, and to get moving on those reductions, we need to move expeditiously. However, we want to do this in a way that provides us with good input from stakeholders, sensible solutions, and enough time to implement the rule in a sound fashion. So while we are moving forward as expeditiously as possible to meet the governor's directive under the executive order, we are going to do this in a sound fashion. Taking a year and a half to do it may be what we need, and is a reasonable amount of time, I think, to go through a stakeholder engagement process and rulemaking.
Representative, let me just add one more component to that. Under federal law, under the Clean Air Act, with the ozone trend upward, moving to closer to a violation of the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for ozone, it's incumbent upon us to try to work towards preventing that so we don't trip into a greater regulatory scheme mandated by the federal government that then you have to implement. So that's another driver towards ensuring that we don't bring additional regulation upon the state as mandated by the federal government by addressing the ozone issue component of this as expeditiously as possible. But I do agree with you that moving quickly, we're moving quickly enough that we can maintain accuracy, but we're not moving quickly enough that we would then be detrimental to our own process or results.
Thank you.
Feel free to come up to the mic and then we can maybe line up that way, so that might be the most fair way to do this.
What was the number that we're allowed to be emitted again? For anything?
So when we issue an air quality permit, it's on case-by-case basis. So industry will come to us and they'll say, we have this new facility we want to construct. It's going to emit this much in air pollution, let's say 100 tons per year in volatile organic compounds or more. And we will allow that in the permit, provided that they demonstrate through air modeling, computer modeling, that those emissions will not exceed the standards. So there's not a cap on VOC emissions per se, it's just the cap is compliance with the ambient air quality standards.
And how do you go about knowing that they're under those levels?
We have, for the 100 tons per year, it's called a major source, and there are a number of reporting and monitoring requirements that come with that permit. Quarterly reports, annual reports,
And who gives
monitoring.
those reports?
Who what?
Who gives those reports?
Industry.
So,
The individual facility is obligated to send us those reports.
so the people that are emitting report them.
Yes, they do. And they certify to their authenticity. We also follow up with
So,
on-site
It's
inspections.
in their best interest to give accurate reports?
It is, because if they are not accurate and they certify that they are, that is a criminal charge.
But who's overseeing that they're giving accurate reports?
The Air Quality Control Bureau.
And how many people are on the Air Quality Control Bureau?
We have about 82 people. We have about 18 in our compliance and enforcement section. It is understaffed. We have increased our permitting 250-fold in the last times, 250 times what we were doing previously in the last 10 years. And we haven't received any more staff. We have about 2,500 permits that we need to enforce. We haven't received any more compliance and enforcement staff. It is definitely understaffed. Yeah.
My question would be for Director Sandoval. And it would appear that the process in Russia hinges upon the definition of waste. So my question is, what is considered waste? Is it the first cubic feet? Is it the first 100 cubic feet? Or 1,000 cubic feet? Or at one point, or at any point, does the economic recovery of that resource become a factor in the consideration?
So it does hinge upon the definition of waste. That is definitely, it will be true for this going forward. Some of the definitions currently within our regulatory framework are very unclear. They're written for an industry that was built 70 years ago. Terms and kind of situations that aren't currently in use right now. So we're taking a look at a lot of the regulations that we currently have on the book and going to be making sure that anything that we do aligns with what the current operating scenarios are and how the industry operates now today. There are going to be situations where things may or may not be a waste. There's a point, for example, maybe gas that has high H2S content. That may not be a saleable resource at some point. So we're going through this process and understanding that not every little thing is a waste. But what we're trying to get is not the tiny things here and there. We're trying to get a handle of the larger problem, and that's really what we're going to be focusing on within definitely our statutory framework as it is, and making sure that our regulations align with that.
Ozone is typically created from a chemical reaction enhanced by generally heat and daylight, if you will, or other light rays. So the question is, in this part of the world where we have more heat and we have perhaps more daylight than more northern parts of the world, and there are standards for ozone that keep dropping. They were 86 maybe 20 years ago, and what are they now, 76 or some sort of thing? They dropped maybe 10 points. And so, I don't know what the number is today, but at any rate, how do you deal with the differences in temperatures in the area and the light intensity that create ozone from fugitive sources that are in many varieties? How do you differentiate what's tolerable and what's not tolerable, and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable? It seems like it's not very definitive about what those numbers are or should be.
Representative Heaton, you're right that the atmospheric chemistry for ozone is very complex. There's VOC limiting ozone, there's NOx limiting ozone, temperature does play a role, transport can play a role. So we're doing our best to try and understand all of that. Wyoming has ozone problems in the wintertime, and we know oil and gas is a contributor to that. It can be a wintertime ozone rather than a summertime ozone because of the complexity of the atmospheric chemistry up there. What we are looking at is what our monitors are showing us. We are doing an inventory. We will evaluate what's in jurisdiction, what's outside of jurisdiction. But we don't have to do that to know that there is a big source of VOC that is contributing, maybe not completely causing the problem, but is contributing to the ozone and smog. And so we have to address the ozone and smog once we see those standards getting close, once we see those ozone levels getting close to the standard, because that's the requirement in the State Air Quality Control Act. If we don't do it, we're not meeting our requirement under the Act. We're not protecting public health. And I failed to mention the complex permitting process that would kick in if we exceed the standards. It's my understanding oil and gas helped us get that portion of the Air Quality Control Act enacted back in 2009 because they understood if we exceed those ambient air standards, it's going to be much harder to get an air permit, much harder to construct, and much harder to operate. So it's really in everybody's interest, industry, public health in general, to keep those ambients, to stay below the ambient standard for ozone.
So my question is just, how many monitors do you have? Where are they located? And if you need more monitors, what do you think would be like an efficient number of monitors?
Yeah, we have 20 monitoring stations statewide.
But I'm just curious about like Eddy County or this area.
We have one in Carlsbad, one in Hobbs. And again, I'd encourage you to go to our website and look at the monitoring locations. It's, again, near real-time monitoring within an hour, and it'll tell you which pollutants that we're monitoring for. Yeah, and I can't tell you where all those monitoring sites and which pollutants they're measuring, but it's there. It's on the website.
A lot of your discussion or of your presentation was about waste. Have you compared the percentage of waste from natural gas production with the percentage of waste that every industrial process inherently includes? Because there's just no industrial process that doesn't generate waste. And have you also considered, as far as the need for these regulations is concerned, that the industry by itself has utterly not one incentive to waste gas because they would love to sell every cubic foot they produce?
So we do operate under the Oil and Gas Act. So our jurisdiction is limited to oil and gas. We don't have jurisdiction under other industrial sources. And having compared, I mean, that would be a pretty complex comparison because you can't just compare apples to apples. I think there are a lot of kind of intricacies. What we have done is we have looked at our data. Our data is trending upwards. And, you know, there are different operating scenarios throughout the state. There is up in the northwest part of the state where they are predominantly gas wells, there is much less gas flared. Down here where there's a lot of associated gas and the main driver is the oil production, what we're finding is there's a lot more, if you were to break those numbers down in by, we can break them down by our districts, which basically is geographic locations. There's a lot more, the volume of wasted, either vented and or flared gas down here is a lot higher.
Real quick question, in your research and looking to see what the implications are across the board, are there any intentions to look into the human health impacts of what's going on?
Yes, there is. We are actually required to do that, again, under the Air Quality Control Act, before going to the board. We have to look at the health impacts of regulating and not regulating this source of emissions. So you'll see a very nice thick package of information going to the Environmental Improvement Board, not just assessing the economic impacts, but also the health impacts of regulating or not regulating that source of emissions. Does anybody else have any questions? You can just stand up if you don't want to come forward too.
Are you familiar with the fact that in most oil and gas producing areas, especially the ones that experience a boom or an increase in production, that there's a certain lag effect as far as infrastructure is concerned, that when you start, you mentioned associated gas, when you start producing oil, that there's no infrastructure to deal with that associated gas, but then there's this lag effect, pipelines are being built, processing plants are being built, and so that waste, in quotation marks, disappears over time because then the industry has actually developed this structure. So I'm wondering whether you are addressing a problem that has already started to diminish with all the new pipelines that are coming in here. Have you looked at that? Oh, by the way, a second question. Are the meetings of the methane advisory panel, are they going to be public meetings?
No, it will be for the MAP members. We will be putting summaries of the meetings online on the portal, the link that was listed. So all of the summaries and information from the meetings will be there.
I would really encourage you to make those public, that at least the public can listen in on those hearings.
So to kind of answer your other question, we are very aware that infrastructure and the lag of infrastructure can create some of the waste issues that we're seeing now. That is why we have several days of this MAP process completely devoted to the infrastructure development and how we kind of get advantage of that. We're also looking at our permitting processes, and right now we basically permit everything that comes through our door unless it is administratively incomplete. So I'd say over 99% of the APDs that come through our door are approved within 10 days. And there is no review in that process really to take into account what the development plan is. We basically will permit a well understanding that there is not a development plan for that area. So, we have to take a look at our broader processes and figure out what is responsible in the permitting of wells and making sure that there's infrastructure around. And if not around, currently what is the plan to develop infrastructure to kind of prevent some of those issues. So it's something we are very aware and cognizant of, and is going to be a huge portion of this process, and really a huge portion of making this successful. We also recognize that we can't flip a switch and it's going to happen overnight. That's not what we're expecting, and we understand that cannot happen. So we have to create a regulatory framework that the industry can succeed within.
Add one thing, so while you're hearing from two secretaries in our departments today on methane, to the point about infrastructure, we as a cabinet are looking at infrastructure solutions, whether that is pipeline, whether that is other infrastructure that is needed in the area in terms of roads and other investments. So I don't want to leave you with the impression that we are regulating or pursuing methane without solving the takeaway capacity issues that the gentleman raised about infrastructure. Those go hand in hand, and we see that they are very much related to each other. So I just wanted to say that infrastructure is a much bigger cabinet discussion that we're having with the governor, and we're looking towards solutions that will go in the infrastructure direction as well as the waste and emission reduction efforts.
Good morning. What is the stated goal of reduction? Are you going to be looking for a 50% reduction in emissions, 50% over 5 years? What's the reduction in emissions that y'all are looking for?
We haven't set that target yet. We need to look at what's possible. We're hoping that the Methane Advisory Panel will help us understand what's possible, what makes sense economically, what can industry do, how much of a chunk of that pie can we take out. So we don't know yet, and we're also working on our baseline for methane as well. As Adrienne said earlier, there are so many other sources out there talking about how much methane is being emitted. But we want to do our own assessment, our own inventory, and really understand what the baseline is. So we don't know yet. Check back in with us, and hopefully we'll have that figured out. Maybe after this map process, it might take until next year though. I also wanted to make one more comment about the map. The document that this group comes up with, the strategies for reducing methane emissions, that will be available for public comment too. So if you all want to look at that before we finalize it, if you have things that we didn't consider, you think we should consider, things that are crazy in there that you want to tell us are crazy, we'd be happy to listen to that too.
Thank you. Thinking about the very compressed timeline and wondering about a rather overwhelming number of issues and operational procedures, my concern is this. There are two basins in New Mexico. I'm here to talk about the Permian Basin, which is different than the San Juan Basin. In the Permian Basin, there is scientific evidence showing reduction in methane emission on top of 25% increase in oil production last year and on the way to a bigger record this year. My question is, do you agree that, do your departments agree that there has been a reduction in methane output in the Permian Basin in recent years? In other words, the pre-rule result is taking us in the right direction.
So I just want to respond on the timeline, and Adrienne will respond on the emissions piece. I don't view this as very compressed. There are folks who were asking the governor for us to start a rulemaking process during the legislative session so that we would be done by the end of this calendar year. We're not doing that. We think that's too fast. And so we've laid out a process that we think is going to work, that will provide adequate input, give us the time to think through, see what's gone before. A number of other states have gone down this road. The federal government has gone down this road. So there are some models for us to look at and see what worked and what didn't. And a lot of you, you're from industry, you have operated under different states and can tell us about your experiences. That's part of why we saw the thing about the technology flexibility. We saw that happen in Colorado. It was pretty prescriptive, and so we think that maybe we can do better than that. So we really are trying to balance the yin and the yang of folks who would probably prefer for us to never take this on ever, and folks who want us to be done with it ASAP. And so we're trying to balance that as best we can and be sensible about it. So.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I share your concern for doing it right, even if it involves slippage in the timeline. I would not want to see the urgency of the timeline push us to a premature rule and regulation on this important area. Thank you.
Your point is well taken, as always, and we don't have a set end date for having the rules finalized for exactly that reason.
So addressing the other kind of piece of your question, there's a lot of different data out there. There are a lot of different data sources. There's data saying this and data saying the complete opposite. And all we can focus on is the data that we are collecting within the OCD and that we presented earlier. So from 2016 to 2018, there has been a significant increase. Understanding that there has been a significant increase in production as well. That was a whole state number, but we could probably put this on that public website. It would be easy to break out. But the majority of those emissions are from the Permian. I'd say that probably over 75% of them are Permian-based versus the rest of them. And we have seen an upward trend in those numbers.
And we do appreciate that the industry is making strides. We're hearing from industry a lot about all of the cool, innovative things that you're doing to bring down those curves. We'll take it into consideration. But as Adrian said, in spite of that, the numbers being reported to us from industry are going up.
Thank you.
I'm understanding that infrastructure plays a huge part in all of this. May I ask if any of you have toured the infrastructure here?
Yes,
You have taken tours.
yes.
So, and you're going to take this back and consider this because funds are desperately needed.
Yes, yeah, and we recognize how much of the state's budget comes from a lot of the people in this room and a lot of this area. And it's a very important part of the state's budget, and the governor recognizes that, and we recognize that. And that's why we are being very cautious and careful and thoughtful in this process, because we don't want to make rash decisions.
Maurice Texter, Marathon Petroleum. From the NMED side, there's a lot of discussion about ozone and the 95% rule. Can you just address briefly if there are other parallel efforts in NMED that would address that more broadly, including counties like Doña Ana that don't have extensive oil and gas development? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So Doña Ana is actually in non-attainment. It exceeded those health-based standards, so we're working to bring it back into attainment. And we've submitted a state implementation plan to EPA with different strategies for addressing that. Part of the problem is when those emissions are coming up from Mexico, we're not going into Mexico to control those sources, we can't. So, but we do have control over the ones in our jurisdiction, and so for the 5 counties that are not, or the 7 counties we listed that are not Doña Ana and Bernalillo, we are looking at both point source pollution and non-point source pollution that might be contributing, and studying those to better understand what is causing those elevated ozone levels, and we're currently, looking at strategies. We're not just looking at oil and gas. In those cases, our state implementation plan will require us to look at broader sources and to do extensive modeling on that to better understand those sources. So that's what we're doing in the 5 counties, Chavez, Lee, Rio, Riva, San Juan. That's what we're doing in all of those counties to deal with the state implementation plan that the federal EPA requires, so that we don't, as we move towards non-attainment. Yeah, it's a big lift for us to do this work.
Good morning. We've talked a lot this morning about waste and about just methane emissions in general. Where is public sanitation departments over the landfills and all of that fit into this, as they naturally emit methane gas during the generation process of eliminating garbage in the trash?
So the question is about other sources of methane in the state, including things like landfills. And we can see from one of our previous slides, this one, that, while oil and gas is the source for 62% of the methane emissions in the state, we also have enteric fermentation cattle that are about 15%, and manure management another 10%. And so, and your question is, what are we doing about those sources?
Well, no, I'm asking why they're not included in this process. Why, if you're looking at this from a global perspective, okay, you're attacking it from every angle. Why are they not included in this?
Yeah, they are included in this. So what we're talking about, so the effort we're talking about with methane from oil and gas is that piece of the pie, the blue piece of the pie. In terms of the landfill component, the federal EPA put out some landfill regulations which we're implementing here in the state of New Mexico, and that piece of the pie should be shrinking in a separate effort. So we are working on landfill issues as well as wastewater treatment plants that have biologic digestion and things like that. those are areas which we are focused on. I think what you're hearing from us and seeing today is that this whole pie, and not to upset anybody, we're not looking at cows, because I know that always comes up. But when you're looking at this whole pie, we do feel like we have coverage in all the right areas, but for the component that we know is contributing the largest, which is the methane VOC component from oil and gas.
So that's going to be attacked from a different angle. It's not actually going to be part of the rulemaking. It's going into any of this process. It's going to be completely separate.
Correct, yeah. Landfills are not part of the oil and gas effort. They're separate and apart, but they are a focus of ours as well.
Right. Well, I just thought the whole thing was about methane gas and emissions, not necessarily
Got it.
Specifically delegating it to the oil and gas industry.
Good clarification, and thank you if we hadn't made that clear. I appreciate that.
A very Carlsbad specific question. The OCD, which would have a large part of this regulatory scheme, was also the chief regulator of the brine well, which is very close to here. And its regulation really was a total disaster for Carlsbad. Why should we in Carlsbad trust the OCD to be more professional and effective in its regulation of methane than it was on the brine well?
So the brine well situation is a separate, not a source of methane emissions, but we do have a Carlsbad brine well authority that the legislature set up that I'm part of, and some local officials are part of. Secretary Kenny is part of that authority as well as Secretary Sandoval and the state engineer. And we have a multi-million-dollar project underway to remediate that facility. We're still working on some of the surface access agreements so that we can get the grouting underway this summer. But we have started a lot of activity at the site, and funding has been secured, and we're well on our way to addressing that problem. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that here because we're here to discuss the methane, but I wanted to let you know that update.
Good morning, welcome to Carlsbad. I've got a question regarding the levels of emissions that will be permitted. By your own admission, production has gone up, emissions have gone down. So you've also stated that the northern part of the state is different from the southern part of the state. We understand all of that. Will the mathematical process, the algorithms that are going to have to be used to determine the level based on production increase and emission increase, will that be made public? Because you've got a room full of people that this is where the rubber hits the road. That mathematical process is going to be critical to their go, no-go decision making. Will that be on the website? Will that be made public?
So for the Environment Department, we're not looking at a standard reduction across industry for methane. We're not looking at an algorithm that applies industry-wide. We are looking at a piece of equipment by piece of equipment, very painstaking process to see what's possible. What can we get, what kind of reductions can we get from the dehighs? What about the heater treaters, the separators? What about the pneumatics? And then we'll get a sense of what's possible and what can be reduced. And it may be, I anticipate it will be on an individual piece of equipment, not an overall reduction or a cap for industry. Does that help you answer your question?
No.
No, okay. Maybe I'm not understanding your question.
When I jump in my truck to go somewhere, I know where I am and I know where I have to be, so that when I get there, I can quit driving. This doesn't sound like we know where we're going.
We know we're looking for emission reductions. We're going through a process to see what's possible. If we asked, say, for a 70% reduction or a 50% reduction without fully understanding what the technological limitations, the economic impacts would be, that would be, I think, foolish of us without hearing from you, industry, without understanding the technology, without really understanding what's possible. We're hoping to carry you all along with us in this process to better understand what's happening and then look at what is possible, what those emission reductions would be. So I hope I'm not frustrating you by not having a very specific reduction target. It's really understanding what's possible.
I just want to add, I couldn't agree more with what Sandra just said, that the reason you're not hearing we're seeking a 70% reduction from all oil and gas operators is because we have majors and independents, we have the San Juan, we have the Permian, we have small mom and pop operators, we have very large operators. So what makes sense to me is that we are carrying you along, we are using this map process to help establish what does the destination look like, but we're all in the car together, and we're going to work on equipment, and it's typical for most environmental regulations that you have process equipment-based standards, meaning like is it a no bleed pneumatic or is it a bleed pneumatic, and if it's a bleed pneumatic, what's the standard cubic feet, how much bleed you allow. So that's what we're going to work on. So the destination is once we all sort of have this map process, then we'll understand what's possible for those reductions. Given a lot of those big variables that I just mentioned, I frankly, to give you a sense of what I'm thinking, I don't think that, a large integrated major should have the same requirements as a small mom and pop independent. That would not be a great way for us to come up with a regulation for methane. So again, it's not to frustrate you, as Sandra said, that we're trying to dodge that answer. We don't have that answer because it's going to take a lot of us in the car together. We'll have some drive time together.
Good morning. I was wondering, sitting here listening to you, one of the greatest wastes that this industry incurs is the loss of productive time. It takes a long time to get a permit. That permit requires, in some cases, results in waste and emissions. Although most of the flaring that occurs may be seen as a waste, the state receives royalties for every bit of that that's flared. So it's not a loss of revenue. But what is a loss of revenue is, to the state, is the amount of time that it takes to get a new permit to get a gas plant up and running. I think Director Sandoval, I believe it was you, I'm not sure who said it, was, if you apply for a permit and it's deemed complete, you can't do any work in New Mexico other than a little grading work. You can't put any foundations down, you can't put any pipe up, you can't do anything like that. But you go over the line into Texas, and they have a rule that allows you to permit and construct at risk, where you say in your permit that this plant will have these emission standards, and once that is deemed complete, you can go out and start building the plant, which allows you to deploy your capital and get a return from your investors much quicker. In New Mexico, we can't do that, and so we wind up wasting 18 months or 12 months or whatever the time frame is before the permit's approved, and the whole time these emissions are occurring. So my question is this: as you look at someone else's emissions, are you going to look at your own? And are you going to look at the processes within the state that cause part of these problems? And are you going to try to quantify that and then report to us what you have done to make reductions there?
We are very cognizant of permit issuance time, and we track it very carefully because we know it means money. The sooner you get your permit, the sooner you can construct, the sooner you can operate. One of the things we've done recently is general construction permits, which is kind of like a permit by rule. If you meet a number of obligations, you can get that permit in 30 days. Yeah, and we've issued a lot of those in 30 days. Part of the problem is The number of permits that, applications that we are getting have gone up 250-fold. No increase in staff to do it. I think the staff that we have does a pretty good job at being more efficient with things like general construction permits, but it is really difficult when your back is up against the wall because you just don't have the resources you need to do the job. Gas plants may take a little more time if they can't fit under the general construction permit. We get that, but we do everything we can to get those out as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'm just going to wrap up the Environment Department response, and then we'll turn it over to Edna because there's a couple permitting processes up here effectively. And again, I would just say that we've made strides before I got to the department by our career staff to ensure that we move away from this permit by permit model, as Sandra described, and effectively put in place a permit by rule, which allows folks to construct with notification to us. I would say, since I've gotten there, that to the extent that any operator has had a permitting issue with us, I've sat down with them at my level and tried to work on whatever that permitting issue is. And most of the time, what I've found out is that the permitting issue that is perceived by us, and I'm not going to say we don't own some of it, we do. We've worked through those issues rather quickly. But the permitting issue that I tend to find as a result of this is that it's an infrastructure permitting issue for rights-of-way through federal lands. I'm not saying that this mitigates your concern, Representative, and sort of others in the room, but it tends to be sort of a permitting issue that we can help leverage a result on. We've gone to FERC, we've gone to the federal government, and we've asked to expedite permits because it solves a methane problem, it solves a capacity takeaway issue. So we are always trying to do better. I will agree with Sandra that we are striving to do as much as possible with as few resources as we have, and we hope to fix that in an entrepreneurial way in the coming years by trying to be a little bit more self-sufficient through fees as opposed to relying on legislative funds. But that being said, I will say if anybody's having an issue with an Environment Department permit, you should absolutely reach out to us and tell me specifically, because we will take that very seriously and move it as quickly as we can under law. So, and let me turn it over to Edna as well.
So we do have different permitting processes, and one of the metrics that we have been reporting to the LFC, which is the Legislative Finance Committee, for the past handful of years, is what percentage of permits we get out the door within 10 days. And that number is usually over 98 to 99%. And the majority of permits for a drilling permit that are not approved are mostly because it was administratively incomplete, which means the applicant did not send us enough information for us to complete the permit. So all of ours basically are out the door, at least for permits to drill within 10 days. I think it's also important to kind of correct that when the gas is vented and flared, the state doesn't currently get severance tax on that and does not currently pledge royalties through the state land office. And so that's why right now it's a waste for the state of New Mexico, because the state is no longer able to collect royalties and severance taxes on it.
Okay, one word about cleanup. It's hard to overstate the impact of the boom, the success of the industry in the Permian on the regulators ourselves. And I know nobody in this room really feels very sorry for us, but please know that over the last few years, from FY15 to FY18, the number of permits to drill that were submitted to the department went from in the 400s to something like almost 2,000. And that's just the applications for permit to drill. That's not about, doesn't have anything to do with the injection wells, disposal wells, and all those kinds of things. And we're talking about the same number of people, actually less budget, less people than just a few years ago. So we're working on rebuilding that. We owe that to you to do that. And so the legislature gave us a few tools this year that will help with that. We got 4 more FTEs, full-time employees. We got a bill passed with the support of the industry, which we really appreciated, that allows us to assess the same fees that Texas assesses on permits. You know, we're talking about hundreds of dollars, typically not a lot more than that, but that goes into a fund to help us upgrade our IT systems, which will help us be more efficient. We know that the answer for continuing to keep up with the industry is not necessarily just more people, it's also how can we work smarter, how can we use technology to keep up. So we really are mindful that we have a lot to do in our own house to keep up, to do a good job on all fronts, and so I just wanted to let you know about a couple of those things.
You mentioned stakeholder involvement quite a lot in your presentations and also in these question and answers, in this question and answer session. So a follow-up to the question about the methane advisory panel, and that is, it appears if these sessions are not held in public, then you really have created two classes of stakeholders. One who are the insiders and the other ones who are not quite so much inside. We actually have a little bit experience with that in Carlsbad because the Department of Energy, as far as WIP is concerned, has had negotiations with people who are opposed to WIP that are not open to the public. So are you planning to continue that trend with basically having two different classes of stakeholders? And have you also considered the implications of the New Mexico Open Meetings Act that you might be in violation of if you don't open those meetings to the public?
So our job is to try and create the right environment at the table to bring the experts forward in a way that allows them to have open and frank dialogue. We're not looking for consensus, but I don't anticipate that these are going to be easy discussions. And we want an ambient environment that allows people to really get down to the nitty-gritty and get the work done. And we don't anticipate that opening up to the broader stakeholder will allow that to happen. People get emotional about heater treaters, you know, pneumatics. It can get really intense, and we just want to create the environment to allow the work to be done the best way possible. That being said, we're going to do whatever we can to make this information available to you all through meeting notes posted on the website, through presentations posted on the website, through a draft report posted with comments to be provided. And this is only the technical report. This isn't even the rulemaking where the rubber really meets the road and you get down into the details and the nitty-gritty. That will be a whole nother public process. So we've done our best, I think, to balance the need to create the right environment to get this really tough work done for the multi-hour meetings we plan to hold, and be as transparent as possible and have the information available to the public.
So you guys mentioned a lot of stuff about transparency, a lot of stuff about this information being available to the public. But a lot of people like me who are younger, who aren't really involved with the industry in oil or gas, who are really concerned. We are young and we are the future in this planet, not only this country and the state. We want to know what this information actually means because it's full of a lot of jargon that we don't really understand. So my question really is any of this information available for the general citizen who doesn't really understand, who is aware that the earth is dying? We just want to know if there's information available to the general public that's understandable for the general public.
So let's talk more about, maybe offline, how we can do that. One of the things we have done is a Clean Air Act 101 for any citizen that wants to come forward and understand this somewhat arcane, technical Clean Air Act process through permitting and enforcement. It doesn't get exactly to your question, on understanding what's going on with climate change and the emissions there, but we can talk potentially more about doing that. I know, just like there's the Master Gardener series, there's the Master Climate Change series that some community colleges have that some of our staff has participated in. I don't know if you have anything like that locally, but we can talk more about getting that sort of information out to people like you who really want it. Because we started at 9:35. So we have about 7 more minutes, sir.
All right, I have a question that's kind of, it's going to kind of seem like an attack, so to speak. We talked about, earlier we discussed kind of how this started, okay? I remember a few months ago, the Secretary of Land Management coming out here with a thermal camera and taking some thermal videos of some of the expenditures, you know, coming off of things such as the Nardo valves and check valves and things that are actually necessary for safety requirements that the oil field is required to have. Within a few days, this executive order was written, and to me, my fear is all of this is leading to this new Energy Transition Act that was passed earlier this year. And my fear is that through controls, rules, and regulation, they're going to push a lot of these folks out of work in order to gain their foothold on their green energy deal that they just legislated. Yet when the Secretary of Energy was asked if she understood what she was actually filming when she was filming, she didn't have a clue. And to me, that's where most of this was substantiated from. And then you guys, of course, got your orders as to what they wanted you to do. So to me, I don't really understand how in a period of the last 2 years, I believe there's been about a 500% increase in production out here in the Permian Basin. And as the gentleman stated earlier, we've got 25% less methane gas than we had prior to that boom, so to speak. Why are we here? What's our point?
So I think that's a great comment. So what we're operating right now, you know, I don't know what has happened in the past, but what we are doing is we are trying to take all of the operational considerations into account. I've worked in the oil and gas industry for close to 10 years. I've worked in the field. I understand the intricacies of the operations and that a lot of equipment is designed to vent or leak or whatever you want to term it. There are a lot of operational considerations that we have to take into account. A lot of those are safety considerations, and so as we're talking about looking at some of our flaring rules, we have to write those situations in there, understanding that if a compressor station down the line goes down, you're going to be flaring somewhere. That's an operational process. It has to happen. There are safety reasons why you might have to flare. So through this process, we are wanting to learn and make sure we understand all of the different operational considerations so that we can write those considerations into our rule, because we can't write something that says there will be no leaks because, or venting or whatever, because that's not going to work. At the end of the day, it's not going to work. It's not going to make anybody successful in this room. It's not going to make the industry successful. It's not going to make the community successful, and it's not going to make us successful. So we have to find a balance of all of that. And a lot of that is going to be making sure we understand what the industry does, how it operates, and how we can still achieve measurable results while writing a rule that works for the industry.
I just want to thank you for that comment too, and appreciate you actually stating it, because I believe there are maybe others in the room that have those same concerns. And I just want to say that this is not a keep it in the ground effort, period. This is an effort to be more efficient, to have less waste, to have less pollution, and to keep this industry healthy and strong and moving forward. It is not a keep it in the ground effort.
Once again, I hired some people because Sandra took the words out of my mouth. But I think it's important that you do hear it beyond Sandra. You hear it from the cabinet secretary, two cabinet secretaries, and you know that we're here on behalf of the governor and that you're effectively hearing it from the governor, which this is not a keep it in the ground effort. We're very supportive of the oil and gas industry. We are looking to see what many of the industry is already doing, which is investing in methane reductions, trying to look at that equity that they're putting into your community already, and trying to figure out how to normalize that equity across all the operators in the most sensible way possible. We do believe that diversification of our energy economy is important, but not at the expense of any one sector. So again, you heard it, we are not, this is, as much as we're talking about methane regulation, it is not about a ban on fracking, a moratorium on drilling, a stopping of oil and gas production at all. It is not. I mean, I want you to know that I'm saying this not only on behalf of the Environment Department, but on behalf of our cabinet and behalf of the governor. So you're hearing it, you know, what it is and what it isn't. I just want to be very clear about that with you.
You've mentioned several times the financial impact on New Mexico of the flare-invented gas loss. What is the financial impact of not flaring and venting that gas because of the not being able to sell the associated product, the oil?
So if I understand your question, it's that of not selling it? Right, okay. So the oil and gas industry makes up close to 45%, somewhere between 40 and 45% of the total of New Mexico's budget. That comes in multiple ways. That comes through the general fund. That comes through royalties that are collected from the state land office. It is a massive portion of the state's budget. We recognize that. The governor recognizes it. The Environment Department and IMNR recognizes that. So there is a cost-benefit analysis that's going to be taking place, and we look at what, you know, we want to go after the sources that are basically the highest, have the highest potential to emit. So, you know, we don't want to waste time on things that are going to get super costly and really nitty-gritty and not make an impact into this whole scheme. So that's going to be part of the stakeholder process and looking at what are the highest emitters, where is kind of the low-hanging fruit, what can we do cost effectively and really minimize some of the emissions that are out there right now. So it's definitely, it's a balance, it's a dance, it's trying to figure out what the best mechanism is. But we understand, say there's approximately $10 million in lost revenue to the state right now, but how much the oil and gas industry does contribute to the state as a whole right now, and that is taken into account and very important.
So I just want to say these two last questions, and then we're going to go on a break. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, you talk about measuring. You wanted good measurements, and but how can you measure the air quality when you don't even know where the air quality monitors are here in the county?
You know, we do know where the monitors are. I just can't recite it to you at this moment.
How many do we have?
We have 20 statewide. We have one.
What about here in Eddy County?
We have one. We have one. Yeah, we have one.
Where's it at?
Liz, do you know where the monitor is? We can look it up. I mean, we don't have to.
Is it near the oil and gas wells?
I'll have to look it up. Yeah.
It's over by the WIP. How many oil and gas drills are over by the WIP?
But hold on. The way the monitoring network works, right, is the monitor is not just looking at, like if you had a monitor at a certain point in the county, it's designed to model large areas of the county.
Okay.
So it's not, you don't have, these are not monitors like at a fence line where you would then collect data for that particular industry that it's next to. That's a different kind of monitor.
So how does it work?
These are ambient monitors that collect, depending on what it's collecting samples for, it'll take periodic samples every few hours or few days. That sample is captured and held in the monitor.
Is it downwind?
It's based on meteorological data, so they're strategically, these aren't randomly placed. These are, in order to place a monitor, you have to understand the meteorology to figure out where the monitor is going to go.
Have you checked to see if they are geologically accurate for where all the wells are?
I will say this, and I'm happy to talk to you. Again, we're not going into a break, and I'm happy to talk to you, but we do have a monitoring network and folks who check to make sure that those monitors are not only up and running, that they don't have downtime, that the samples are collected and analyzed, and that they feed into the global, the New Mexico global scheme of our network. So I have no reason at this point to think that we have to move any monitors. But that is a discussion that I would want to build your confidence in what we're doing and listen to what you're saying, because it's through these processes we expand our own thinking. So happy to talk to you about this as well.
That's what I would like to know.
Yes.
One more, sir? And then we'll take a half
Well,
hour.
just real quick, a while ago I made kind of a long-winded question, but part of it seemed to get skipped. Okay. Over the last 2 years, with a 500% increase in production, but yet a 25% less methane now than there was 2 years ago before that boom took place. Wouldn't it make sense that the companies are already doing what they need to do to reduce the methane? Why not just encourage them to keep doing what they're doing and let them do their own engineering rather than try and regulate it?
Well, we need to look more closely at that data. I know some of that's EPA data that we don't always have a whole lot of confidence in. I do want to say, though, that some industry is doing better than others. Some companies do better than others. Some are really stepping up to the plate and using air instead of gas in their pneumatics. Some are doing things like e-frac. Some are just really going after these emissions, and others are not. And so I think we need to have a discussion about bringing everybody up to looking at methane control and VOC control. With that, let's see, it's 10:40 just about, so let's come back at 11:10 and we'll go for an hour and a half on comments. 2 minutes for your comments. Thank you. So we're going to get started on the comment or input period. I took the presentation down because it's actually no longer working. I'm feeling just grateful we made it through the presentation and the questions with functioning the whole time. Again, I want to provide each of you with 2 minutes to speak. We've got your names here, and we will call you forward. But first, we want to give our elected officials an opportunity to get started. So, are there elected officials who would like to come forward with a statement? And then, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Phelps Anderson, representative of District 66, Chavis, Lee, and Eddy counties. My t-shirt says I stand for oil and gas, and actually they left off, I stand for oil and gas, New Mexico, and America. Because I believe the issues today are truly beyond just being one industry's issues. This is an industry that in my lifetime has become self-sufficient in oil and energy production. 3 decades ago, that was a bit of an unimaginable outcome. We had peakers running around the world saying, hell, they found it all. There isn't any more to find. And yet today, here in Eddy County, Lee County, southeast New Mexico, we see production increasing. My point to you in my limited time is to urge you not to fall back on old, failed rulemaking processes of a whip and a hammer. You need to go forward in a truly innovative and progressive way and say, in order to come up with New Mexico's new strategy on methane, we should build it upon something else. And that word is innovation. I see it on your slides. And I think, boy, now innovation needs to be number one. There's a man walking around today, Canary Project or Project Canary. He has a methane detection system that didn't exist 2 years ago. Innovation and flexibility have to be in that same sentence. and I heard the word possible flexibility, and I thought, no. We don't need possible. We need flexibility. These two basins are different. These fields are different. There's not a person here. I thought about saying, everybody who is here who wants to release methane gas into the atmosphere, raise your hand. That was what I thought the answer would be. These people are dedicated in their family, their lives, their businesses, their communities to help America meet a national security issue. People in the oil and gas see oil and gas energy self-sufficiency as a national goal. And that's what happens here in Eddy County. I believe the control of our methane is being accomplished without the new strategy. Okay, well, we're going to have a new strategy anyway, so I can live with that. But I hope you will build it on innovation. My suggestion is New Mexico and our good governor say we're going to have a prize. We're going to do it for 3 years in a row, and we're going to offer $1 million to the best methane capture idea. The X Prize did that on a spaceship to space, and now it looks like we're launching them all the time. Private sector. And I think it's going to take I think the best technology on methane capture has yet to be developed. I don't think we have it. So I think to myself, oh boy, they're going to write a rule and it's going to be real strict and steadfast, and we're going to go around and make sure we're in compliance. And in the meantime, industry is going to forge ahead with new and better technology built upon new ideas. So I hope you will come up with a strategy that says we need to see new ideas, new innovation to help us achieve these realistic, economically feasible goals. And then I think you ought to go over the economic development people and say, look, if we're going to offer $1 million prize, let's go to these entrepreneurs and say, hey, we want you to build that in New Mexico. We want this technology developed here and not export it to another state, nothing against some of our other states. So that's my idea. We have 2 national labs that can help us with this process. I hope you will include that and put innovation first, because I do believe it is the key word to finding the best methane strategy. Thank you.
Secretaries, ladies, I'm Larry Scott, State Representative from District 62, Hobbs in Lee County. And first, I would like to applaud all 4 of you for coming down for this program, because I'm sure you knew coming to town that you were likely to be facing an unfriendly environment. And it takes some courage to do that. I would like to follow up on my question earlier with respect to waste, because New Mexico is blessed, if you will, with thousands of low-volume oil-producing wells that produce, in conjunction with that, very small volumes of gas. For various reasons, be it volume, or quality, or distance from infrastructure, this gas would be, well, is unmarketable. It has no value in the market. So, when we start to define waste, if we're looking at these certain situations where economical oil wells might need to be shut in to accommodate these new policies, the consideration has to be given as to whether or not shutting in prematurely that oil production is considered waste. I urge you during this methane advisory panel process to take some of those economic considerations to heart, because we cannot, under any circumstances, write a one-size-fits-all rule that applies to both high volume and low volume production. I'd like to make one last comment. I didn't get to ask this question during the Q&A period, but many in the audience will not know what the acronym ENGO stands for. And I can provide that explanation. I would prefer that one of y'all do so and explain why those folks have a seat at the stakeholder table.
Sure, so we're trying to mostly make sure, as a courtesy, of course, we're going to respond to you, Representative. For most folks, just know that this is not going to be super interactive because we want to hear from as many people as possible. But ENGO stands for Environmental Non-Governmental Organizations. So there are a number of organizations that have worked on methane emission reduction strategies around the country or within New Mexico. There are a number of groups in New Mexico very focused on this that we hear from. And they have technical expertise, and they are we hear from them a lot about how they want us to, what they want us to do, how they want to run the process, and we think it's actually very important that they hear from industry technical experts too, one-to-one, in an environment where we can kind of put cards on the table and really talk about what technologies are there and what, because if we only meet with industry, and then we only meet with NGOs, I think we miss an opportunity to create consensus about the art of the possible here. And so that's why we're trying to include those folks there. So we also didn't want to just include, and when we say national groups, these are typically folks who live and work in New Mexico. They may work for a group that has a footprint broader than New Mexico, but we're not talking about necessarily flying in people from California or whatever. That's not what we're trying to do. So anyway, and then there are also groups that work here in the state that have expertise. So long-winded answer to your question, but that's right.
Madam Secretary, that was a very thorough answer to my question, and I would feel more comfortable with the answer if those folks lived and worked in these communities, rather than along the railroad. Thank you for your answers.
Good morning. I'm Ray Miller, the mayor of Artesia. I'm not as eloquent as our legislative folks. And I will follow a line similar to what Mr. Anderson talked about a little bit. One of the things that I did years ago was I served on the Resource Advisory Council with the BLM, and at one of the meetings there was a presentation by one of the state of New Mexico personnel where he had done extensive research through the federal database of emissions related to oil and gas from around the world, and compiled, put together what he had found in the way of emission data related to oil and gas emissions from other countries and then also the United States. And his conclusion that he came up with, which is very interesting, is the fact that every MCF in barrel of oil produced in the United States results in less emissions than the same barrel or MCF produced outside of the United States than any other country, including the solid. By looking at that, it becomes a thing where I appreciate the fact that you all are looking at trying to keep a healthy industry, because if you enact regulations such as Mr. Scott described, where there would be a reduction of production in this area, then those barrels will be replaced by a foreign barrel that will actually result in more emissions. And so it is imperative that we actually try to keep our regulations for this industry as healthy domestically, because it'll result in less emissions and we're going to use fossil fuels for quite a few years in the future. The other area, and I know you've got a lot of good ideas and industry that has posed them, but I actually operate a small company and we've been in business for 10 years. And I may be a little bit unique that we only operate 8 wells. It winds up being a thing where the largest amount of our emissions result directly from the failure of the BLM to timely complete a right-of-way permit for a gas pipeline where they were trying to loop a line next to a line. In other words, there was an approved right-of-way with a current pipeline, and the gas company was seeking to set another line immediately adjacent to it, and that approval took over 9 months, which obviously is 6 months too long. The gas company had done everything right. As soon as they identified that the production in that field was exploding beyond their capacities, they had immediately applied for the right-of-way, both with the state land office, with the private owners, and the BLM. The BLM had less than 1 section of a 6-mile line, and no work could begin until the BLM approved the line. The operators were shut in for a 6-month period, 50% of their time. All of them were oil wells, all of them were new wells, and as a result, the flaring and venting that occurred was 50% of all the gas at that time. I've had more emissions from our company in that 6 months than all of the other emissions that we've had related to completion of new wells, to our existing facilities and all. It's a thing where you have an opportunity, because if you simply could speed up the BLM and the state land office also has a timely approval process for the pipeline right-of-ways, it would save a tremendous amount of emissions. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm State Representative Catherine Brown, and I would like to begin by bringing you greetings from Senator Greg Fulfer. Senator Fulfer is stranded in Colorado today, ready to greet chili is inferior. He was trying to get some, I guess, jet fuel into the jet he was going to be traveling on to get down here, and they put avgas in instead. So he's there a little bit longer. But I do have a statement from him. It is 3 pages, single-spaced. So I'm going to kind of edit it as I go. Stay within the 2 minutes. Okay, I'll have a copy of you as well. He begins with thanks to Secretary James Kenney and the environmental staff, and to Secretary Probst and her staff for traveling here today. He says, I served on the NMEIE for the last 7 to 8 years, and we were always told there wasn't enough money to travel here to have a meeting in this part of the state. So finally, welcome. He says it's good to see oil and gas providing for our state, and it's nice to see you here in Carlsbad being directly with the people who work in the industry. I'm happy to say my Senate District 41 makes up the heart that is considered the third largest oil and gas production area in America, and that is the United Counties. And he says this is something that he thinks we should be proud of. The oil and gas industry is providing national security, and it's providing unheard of security for the state. It's providing jobs all through Mexico, some directly related to oil and gas, and some indirect. He speaks of the hotels, the restaurants, all the economic activity that we see, and he also points out that a big one is jobs and education. The oil and gas industry is making it possible for our children to get an education. He also says that education security and better education system is important for the children and the generations to come. I don't know what angle you are looking at taking to address methane gas, but when you look at the studies I see, oil and gas is doing the work and spending the resources to abate the loss of methane. Very little talk and a whole lot of action is happening on the oil and gas side. hope that you will find ways to work with one of the most innovative industries there is, and that is the oil and gas industry. If you want to look at who is actually spending the money to try to fix the problem, it is the industry. We need to find ways to encourage the continued growth of technology and allow us, that has allowed us to move further innovation. We have a lot of brain power right here in New Mexico, with the national laboratories and the companies that are pursuing innovative technologies and improvements. Coming up with candidate ways, we do not but divert investment dollars to other states. We can set on the sidelines, I think that's a challenge, set on the sidelines and watch the other states brag as they develop their schools and they continue to be last in all categories. So sound leadership is needed on this matter, and it's time we look at New Mexico and ask ourselves, how do we make ourselves number one? How do we encourage innovation here in our state? How do we get New Mexico out of poverty? What can we do to help our industries grow from within the state? Where do we start this? Where do we start this? We have the opportunity to do this. So he says, I say we build New Mexico for our families and kids for generations to come. Let's make New Mexico a place where our kids can come back to raising family to get a good education to get from. So let's not get caught up in politics and rhetoric. Let's help the oil and gas companies that we have here today and with the national labs to bring out the innovation we need to solve problems. And now I'd just like to make a few comments of my own. There are a lot of people who like to badmouth the oil and gas industry, but I know as a legislator that this is the industry that by and large pays for what we do in the state government. And so if we did not have this industry, it would be a world of hurt. One of the worst things as it is, we can keep those full. We have our own gas workers here. So if an industry is providing about 40% of the work of our city budget, we need to find ways to apply and appreciate that. And as a state representative for District 55, which is the eastern half of Benton County, in which the production is occurring, I want to say that I'm very proud of the other people who work in this industry. I'm proud of the companies that do the job right. And just want them to know that they are appreciated. We've heard some talk today about the data on methane emissions, how those emissions are up and down, even in the face of increased production, things are really happening. So apparently we've got to take a look at those pieces of data and figure out which it really is. But I will say this, that if indeed the emissions are going down and the net production is going up significantly, we need to praise the industry. And I liken it to a student who is getting C's in school, and besides that's not good enough, it strives for B's and gets them. And I feel like the oil and gas industry is serious about reducing methane emissions. They're striving for all A's. And so the last thing we want to do is bring out the power. Let's give an encouragement, positive reinforcement. That's the best way to do this. So I see this resource bonanza for our area as a gift. It is something that we can use to bring the state up in so many categories. So let's treat it like it is and really take advantage while we also take care of our environment and all those concerns that we all can share. Thank you very much.
It's got black tape on it. From a farm boy, I put baling wire on it to make it stand up very well. Thank you for coming. I would tell you that you have to remember that what will drive change more than anything is is economics and innovation. We've seen that in drilling technologies and many other technologies recently in our oil and gas operation. And I think, as Catherine and I think Larry probably Phelps mentioned, even with the increase, the significant increase that we have seen in oil production, we have also seen a significant decrease in methane emissions. It has occurred, and I think it goes without saying that the industry has been judicious in trying to capture those emissions as they go through. I would challenge you to not tell this industry, and certainly not the people here today, that this is a difficult issue that you can't participate in because it's just too difficult. That just does, I mean, government goes around all the time talking about ethics and transparency, which I wholeheartedly support. But I heard you say that these MAT meetings would not be open to the public because it just isn't good for you to be there. And that just, I don't think that's going to work. We saw that same type of transparency in the formation of the Energy Transition Act, and it did not go over well, and this will not either. So I would challenge you to open that up and make sure that they're public. This industry drives New Mexico, and has for a number of years. It has employed generations of New Mexicans. And it's embedded in the communities that you're in, as I know you feel. And it deserves to be treated equitably just to the green energy issues that are going on with subsidies and that thing. My goodness, look at the $300 million that we put into the movie industry and what that puts into New Mexico. So, I think this industry deserves more than just a seat at the table. They have more technical capacity than the government has. They have more economic understanding of the industry than the government has. And I think you ought to embrace them. If you have a goal, you ought to be able to set it. And then you ought to go to the industry and say, this is what we're looking for, this is the reasons, how can we get there most economically? I think the way you're going about it is going to cause you lots of heartache. And I think you need to allow the public to be included. I think you need to have those meetings should be videotaped and they should be open to the public so people that can't get to Santa Fe can pull them up on their computer and watch them and see what's going on. If you do that, you have a chance of the real kind of bipartisan effort that I think you talked about, but the processes that you're describing just aren't there. So I hope that as you go forward that you do that, because I think in the end you'll get a better set of regulations. Thank you very much again for coming. I'm Jim Townsend, and I serve District 54. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm State Senator Ron Griggs from Senate District 34. I drove over from Alamogordo this morning not really knowing what to expect today, who was going to be here. And I think all of you should be really excited to see all of the people that came, because it tells you that they're interested in what you're doing potentially impacts them in ways that I think probably everybody came over here expecting it to be negative. I hope that's not the case, and I hope that you indeed work with these individuals as Representative Townsend talks about, because they're the ones that know their industry. They know how to get from point A to point B. There's been discussion, and quite a bit of it, about technology. And we look at, everybody's got maybe an iPad or they've got a computer. Look at the technology in this business. Look at going down, drilling a hole, going down 10,000 feet, turning to the right or the left, going out miles to produce what is produced today. That can't be understated, that is major advances in technology. And they can certainly help find the solution to methane and methane emissions. And there was one statement that was made, and I think it was just in passing almost, and I was talking about looking for maybe a 70% reduction or a 50% reduction. I don't know that that's really what you're looking for, but it may or may not have been the right statement to make, even in passing, just because it seems to indicate there's already this pre-evaluated result. And if it is, I think we probably need to be upfront. But if it's not, then we probably don't need to make that sort of statement. New Mexico is a state that has relied on natural resources forever. And we look at what's happened to certain communities where either economic conditions changed or government interjected themselves. You look at the city of Raton. Raton was about twice as big as it is today or more when coal was a major player in Raton. Raton went from 13 or 14,000 down to about 6. And of those 6, about half of them are on some form of assistance. And that's because coal died in Raton. Go to Grants. Look at Grants and look what happened when uranium died in Grants. Go to White Oaks, New Mexico, and look what happened when the gold play ran out. You're sitting here contemplating things that potentially impact this industry to where it could focus more in other areas than in New Mexico. You're also sitting adjacent to one of the largest, if not the largest, oil producing states in the country, in Texas. And how does the methane that's produced in Texas impact the environment over here in New Mexico? And I think you've got to take that in somewhat in consideration. And ultimately, if operations were to move to Texas because our regulations become too hard, you still may face the same problems because Texas is not as regulated as to the extent that you're considering New Mexico to be regulated now. I appreciate you guys coming today because I think all of this is important for all of us. But I hope genuinely that all of these folks have a seat at the table and we work through this in a manner that we can take care of it reasonably and responsibly. And I look forward to hearing how it comes out. I look forward to working with you when I have that opportunity because I think we can avoid certain things like we did have with a couple of the pieces of legislation that were introduced this last session. And we wound up having a little more fights over them than maybe we needed to. But if you guys do this up front, I think we can surely come up with something that works and move our state forward. So thank you all for being here today. And remember, these guys provide about half the budget and probably all the surplus. So these are the guys who make it happen for you. So thank you again. Bye-bye.
So we're just going to finish up with the elected officials and then move to the rest of the audience for your 2-minute inputs. Are there other elected officials that want to come forward to us? Sir, go ahead. Yeah, no, sir, go ahead. I'm just reminding folks that that's what we're doing, and then we're going to move on to the rest of the audience.
Thank you. I thought you were going to ask me questions. Stephen McCutcheon, Eddie County Commissioner, and welcome to Eddie County. You know, it's been stated here that about 50% of the state's budget, and basically all the surplus, we don't agree with Senator Green said, that comes from Eddie County. So we want to put their Eddie in Lee County. So we want to put that in perspective. We've got the financial part of New Mexico being pulled by 2 horses. The first horse is branded Eddie and Lee County, and the second horse is branded the other 31 counties of New Mexico. And as a county commissioner, I look at that, look at the rest of the state, and realize that 50% of your salaries are paid by Eddie and Lee County, these 2 small counties in the corner of the state. That 50% of the overpasses that go in Espanola are built by Eddie and Lee County. 50% of the people that are on some sort of assistance, they're provided for by Eddie and Lee County. And so, as we go forward, and as county commissioner, we're looking at what the state is doing, it's a consistent fight for us. I'd probably say about 75% of our time spent in the capacity of elected officials is spent fighting the state on something. It's been mentioned today about the permits. We've got a lot of pipeline permits that need to come through. There are SWB permits that have been withheld, and that affects everybody. So it's not only in the capacity of elected official, but also I see that in industry. And we see the welders that are short on hours and pipeliners that are out of work because those things don't come through. And so when we think about what the state does, or what Eddie and Lee County does for the state of New Mexico, the contribution is wonderful. And then all it seems like our time is spent fighting the state on other issues, whether it's the fracking bill, whether it's thinking not didn't go anywhere, or whether it's the methane emissions. And I'm not saying that there's not some common sense that needs to be done, but when we know something, if we know anything about government, common sense is generally not in the same question. So I think that's where everybody's concerned. That's where everybody's concerned lies. We have, if we are a football team and we look at, we want to know who our competition is. We watch video. We try to figure out their strengths and their weaknesses, and we have a better football team right across the state 40 miles south. So at some point, big oil fights and fights and fights and fights to keep the production in New Mexico, to try to provide the jobs for people that live here. And at some point, the fight becomes too much. And at some point, they just echo the words of Davy Crockett and say, y'all may go to hell, and I will go to Texas. And so, you know, I'm afraid that that's going to happen. And I'm afraid that these people may pick up. That may not be good. But I appreciate everything, and thank you guys for coming here this evening.
That is our test of our emergency system. It's done
Okay,
every
so
Wednesday.
it's
done
only a
every
test.
Wednesday.
This is a test, it's only a test. You can stay in your seats.
If this were truly an emergency, I'd be running out the door. Good morning and welcome once again. My name is Eddie Rodriguez and I'm Mayor Pro Tem for Carlsbad. And when I say welcome, I really do mean that. I'm born and raised right here. This is where I live. This is it. I'm here to protect everything we have. And like Commissioner McCutcheon said, we take great pride in the fact that we are providing for the rest of the state. Just like a father takes pride in providing for his family. You know, he works hard, brings that paycheck home. And in this case, the whole state is able to benefit from the work of the industry. So as we move forward and we're looking at these emissions and control of emissions, and as we were talking earlier, it may not be actually the emissions, but the equipment that we're looking at, whether that equipment can be then mandated to us, or are we actually going to look at emissions? And if we are, do we have a baseline? do we have a mark in the sky where we need to reach and attain? We're not sure about all of that. But we do, the Permian Basin in general, and the community of Carlsbad in particular, is very interested in getting a methane rule which has to be put in place. It was a campaign promise we know we're not going to get away from. So something has got to be put in place. We just ask that that something be something that we can work with. Something that, a true compromise is something that neither side is completely happy with, but can live and operate with. And I'm hoping that that's what we can attain, what we reach for. I was also happy to hear that you understand the difference between the northern basin and the southern basin, small operators, major operators, where a particular piece of equipment which will decrease the release may be attainable for a Chevron. It may not be attainable for a mom and pop, and we surely don't want to shut them down. Because just like America, you know, Walmart isn't what makes America. It's those little mom and pops, those 5 and dime stores that pitch in just every day to our producing. Our operators are just the same way. We have the majors, but we have more small operators than anything else, and that'll be what makes a difference. Tech and innovation will, of course, lead the way, right? And although you guys don't like or believe in the EPA, they do have empirical data that was used to determine the fact that there was a reduction in emissions, even though we had an increase in production. Now, in the San Juan Basin, emissions fell by 55%, but production fell by 24%. So that's understandable. The anomaly, the thing that I'm really proud of here, is that the Permian Basin methane emissions fell by 35%, while combined production increased by 101%. So going back to the question I asked earlier, how are we going to determine what that level of methane emission is? We need to understand that so that we can work it out and find out how we're going to get there. But the oil and gas industry has proven that it can, of its own volition, lower its emissions because it doesn't want to waste that. It doesn't want to spend a penny that it can't gain back. So as we work toward that, I hope that we can work hand in hand, something that we can work that will be mutually beneficial and help us move forward. And to go back to an old sports adage, those that can play and those that can't coach, the state in this place is the coach. The players are right here. You might call the play, but we're on the field. We can tell you that's not going to work, coach. We need to do something different. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, secretaries, directors, and to your staff who also traveled with you, and to the community members here. I'm Greg Maxey. I'm a Lovington School Board member, and we have a unique position here in that we are nonpartisan. Many of the parents that are here today are also working in the oil field. We just want to remind you that in 2009, we were decimated in public education. We lost over 1,800 teachers. The only way that we survived to continue to produce STEM-type education was our strategic partnerships with the Devon energy companies, Chevron, Conoco, things like that. They filled those voids that were not being filled. But this year, I want to give you some important statistics. Teacher retirements are down 25%. School vacancies of teachers not being in the classroom are also down 20% across the state because of the $1.2 billion that was added to the economy last year that the governor put into public education. As nonpartisan, we trust that our government will work with us. We have to because that's where our funding source is from. You all came here today and you have presented some great big ideas and you have made some promises to these people. We're just asking you on behalf of public education to continue to keep those promises. Make sure that these people have a seat at the table. It's really hard to understand, and I'll let go only a few of those. The independent producers, we know exactly what the price of oil is today. And though it may be listed on the stock exchange at $54 a barrel, the different oil refineries are not paying that to the individual producers. It can be as low as $10 to $12 less than that. The oil and gas industry and those mom and pops they're committed to reducing. They're committed to reducing and protecting the environment because it's the environment in which they live in. They're not majors, but we depend on the majors also. We depend on the Permian Strategic Partnership to begin to help us build capacity for our pre-K, and they're doing a great job in providing those dollars for that. We just ask you to continue to work with them, especially this year as it looks like they will produce about $2.2 billion in new revenue for our state. We thank you, and the last thing that we ask is, in regards to the methane advisory committee, we ask that you would have a public school representative, because it's the money that's contributed by the taxes that sustains our two sovereign wealth funds that someday our future New Mexicans will have to use to continue to advance public education. And so because we have a large stake in that, we ask that you at least have a representative there. Thank you so much for coming, and we will believe you, and then we will look forward to holding you accountable to the promises that you have made. Thank you so much. Again, safe travels.
Any other elected officials wish to make a statement? You know, we have a list here of people who signed up to make a statement, but today is Purple Heart Day, and I just want to provide an offer to Purple Heart recipients here that may wish to make a statement to come forward first. Okay, so we have about 30 people that signed up to make a statement, and the first one, ask a few of you folks to come down just so that we can get people teed up and move through quickly. First one is Reverend Stephanie Harmon, second is Nicholas King, and the third is David Pallas. Reverend.
Thank you all for coming. We appreciate your effort to hear from the local voices. I am Stephanie Harmon. I am a resident of Carlsbad. I'm a Christian pastor, United Methodist, and because of my faith, it causes me to be greatly concerned about how we care for each other and how we care for this planet upon which we depend for our existence. Regularly in the local newspaper, I am a current Argus reader. And in the legal sections are the permit applications for release of toxic pollutants into the air. 3 permit requests were published just this week alone. Between June 1st and August 2nd, there were 15 for Eddy and Lee counties. What concerns me is giving just one example of the amount of pollutants that is put into the air. One permit alone at one site would allow 95 tons per year of sulfur dioxide, which we know is highly toxic. That's one site, one company, and we know there are dozens and dozens throughout. I often hear the argument that expansion should be allowed because we need jobs. Yes, we do, but at what cost? I was so pleased to see innovation as one of your key tenets for moving forward. And I've heard it echoed by many of the people that have already spoken and asked questions. Please include innovation as one of the keys, because we know from other fields of experience that innovation in other fields has led to new jobs, new processes, and new technologies. So please help us look beyond the short-term gain to the long-term, because our very lives and our planet depend on it. And thank you to all who have come today.
First of all, I want to thank you for a very thoughtful and informative presentation this morning. That's really great. My name is Nick King, and I'm a pastor at Carlsbad Mennonite Church. This globe, our home, is a gift of God for us to take care of. We're from this Carlsbad area, but we're also from New Mexico and the U.S., and are part of the whole world that is affected by each of our actions. None of us like rules for ourselves, but from kindergarten to family to city to state to federal and even international entities, we all have rules that are for the common good. There are rules that Forest Tire cannot dump our old tires on an empty lot. Or Master Lube cannot dump our used crankcase oil in the storm sewers filled with grit. Our air is just as sacred as our earth and water. And now we're dealing with methane and other toxic byproducts that are part of the oil and gas industry that is so important to all of us in this area. But pollution may be even more prevalent than what is self-reported by the industry. On top of that, there's been virtually no enforcement of air quality standards for the last 9 years here in New Mexico, or even the pollution laws that we do here. So any reasonable laws for the good of us all of us, and all of the world, as well as realistically feasible for the oil and gas industry, should be created and enforced. In this highly competitive oil and gas industry, reasonable standards would cost. In this highly competitive oil and gas industry, reasonable standards would cost a little more to implement. So it would not be fair to those companies that do want to do the right thing if not all the operators are operating by the same rules. We're the Wild West, but we're also God's children that have a responsibility for our siblings around the world and our posterity. We as a state should set pollution standards and enforce them. Thank you.
Thank you for sticking to the 2-minute time frame. So I'm savvy to say David Boke? Or Boke? David Boke? No? Ah, okay, sorry. And then if Jerry Washburn is in the room, if he can come forward to speak up.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for coming. David Bach, like the composer. I am a attorney in Las Cruces. I came out for this meeting. Thank you all for coming out as well. I want to start off by complimenting our friends here from the oil and gas industry. You all are some of the most innovative people in the world. As an environmental lawyer, I've studied some of the things that you guys do, and it's amazing. I mean, you figured out how to recover resources located 2 miles below the ocean, below the surface of the ocean, so, a mile of water and 2 miles below that. You figured out how to recover resources trapped in shale formations that were long thought to be inaccessible, when people thought there was going to be peak oil. And so that's brought us to a place of energy independence and greatly reduced emissions from the electricity sector. So we need you all to innovate again. We're facing a climate crisis that threatens everyone's future. We're seeing drastic change all around us. The Arctic is experiencing the worst wildfires it has ever seen. The Arctic Circle, where polar bears are on fire right now. We're seeing record-breaking temperatures all over the world. 108 degrees in Paris last month, 97 in Detroit. And if current trends continue, the science is clear. We're going to expect devastating wildfires, crop failures, political instability, mass migration affecting New Mexico. So this is an issue we have to solve. We're also seeing dangerous levels of ozone and hazardous air pollutants in southeastern New Mexico. Carlsbad has violated EPA's ozone standard 6 times in 2019, which means more asthma attacks, more heart attacks, and more premature deaths. The toxic air pollutants, which are also included in methane, are subjecting residents of southeast New Mexico to a cancer risk greater than 1 in 250,000. Now, I know we can solve these problems through technical innovation. I think people on both sides have emphasized that. Technical innovation is key. Reducing venting, leak detection and repair, process and operational changes, all these are really important first steps that can reduce dangerous emissions and prevent, is that my time?
It is, Jerry.
We can reduce dangerous emissions and prevent waste and increase tax revenues. So I encourage all of us to think big and work together to solve this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bond.
Hi, I'm Jerry Washburn. I'm Superintendent of Schools for Carlsbad Municipal Schools. The main reason I am here is I think we all recognize how much money oil and gas is bringing to the state. But what I see is that we have a generational opportunity to positively impact education as a result of the contributions that the oil and gas industry is making to the state. I applaud balance. I applaud the idea that we all recognize that. I do not want to see that opportunity squandered. My family came to New Mexico in a covered wagon. My wife's family came in a covered wagon. My grandkids are here. I love this state deeply. And when we have opportunities like we have right now, as we develop regulations, I would just encourage you to make sure that those regulations continue to make this a magnificent, beautiful place to live. Thank you.
So next we have David Rogers, Denton McCullough, and Jim Goodbar. Please come forward.
Good afternoon. I'm the Reverend David Wilson Rogers, pastor of the First Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Carlsbad. I'm a 17-year resident of Carlsbad, and I'm married to a fourth-generation Carlsbad native. This is my home, and it will be for many, many years to come. I'd like to express my gratitude and appreciation for coming down here and listening to the diverse concerns and perspectives and voices regarding methane in this community. I also want to clearly state that change is hard, especially when change is not fully understood. Consequently, some may respond to change and have with fear and hostility. And this can be exacerbated when various entities seek to use divisive rhetoric, fear-mongering, and intimidation to avoid the other side being heard. Members of my congregation have been personally threatened and intimidated for simply asking questions about the safety of their family. They live in some of the more toxic areas of methane release in this county. And some with whom I have spoken have been afraid to even be seen at meetings such as these because they have been intimidated by employers, neighbors, friends, and other family trying to keep their voice silent. Even yesterday on the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association Facebook page, there were threats suggesting gun violence against those who speak out like I'm doing now. I respectfully urge you to look past the distorted and categorically false claims of economic disaster and job killing, to look past the fear-mongering and the hatred and focus on fact. I'm pleased to hear the collaborations that I see this organization putting together. We need to understand the risks, the facts, and have reasonable, responsible, and effective policies in place that protect the greater good, something we can all embrace as neighbors together. I also would like to present to you a letter signed by faith leaders expressing our shared concern of God's creation and the health of all working in this region. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you still new? I'm confused.
Thank you.
Are you not confused?
Carlsbad.
I don't get it. That's something I'm missing.
I'm a resident of Carlsbad. I was born in Roswell. I'm not from California. I am concerned about many health and environmental problems resulting from methane pollution, as well as the loss of income to our state and our children's education. I support strong methane rules. In addition, I am troubled greatly by numerous social issues that adversely affect the quality of life in Carlsbad. I look around my community and it's not what it used to be. I feel that we are losing our last hope of Carlsbad becoming a thriving community. We have so much potential. We live in this beautiful environment full of recreational opportunities. This would be a wonderful place for retirees, home for traditional farming and ranching, and an inviting place for tourists and retirees to come and visit our natural wonders. Instead, we are trading a quality of life at high cost of living, exorbitant rental prices, terrific traffic and too many accidents, growing crime and drugs, and ruination of our natural environment. This all makes me very sad as someone who loves this community. Our area is growing too quickly for non-permanent residents who have no roots in our town and will leave as soon as the oil field dries up. Forget about retiring here or tourism because people cannot afford to stay there. Our air is being polluted and our districts are living with flares and oil rigs for a boom that will last maybe 15 years. What will be left for those of us who call this home?
Thank you. Next on the list is Michael Harris, Larry Mitchell, and Francis Gonzalez. Michael Harris,
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. Biggest thing that I would like to challenge you to do is, as you go forward with this committee and this group of individuals, is to try and find a medium. You know, we've got companies out here, everything from the largest oil producers in the world to mom and pop shops, as they were designated earlier. As these rules are being put together, I want you to consider how it affects both sides of that spectrum and everybody in between. There are currently companies right now that are already leaving the state of New Mexico because of regulation. There's companies already that have already been forced out of business because of regulation. I just want you to, I challenge you to look at that very vigorously and ensure the stability of the people that are here. Because some of these people that are employed here now call this home. Yes, there are many that have come and traveled from out of state to be here to fulfill roles that we can't provide ourselves. But at the same time, if the companies leave, what are the people that are going to be left here have left? And they're already standing in line to do so. The company that I worked for, as a matter of fact, shut its doors on the 21st of June because of regulation. These have lasting effects on the citizens of not only Carlsbad, but the rest of New Mexico. As one of our elected officials stated earlier, 50% of the revenue comes from right here. Well, that 50% of the revenue goes away. That could mean your jobs as well.
Good afternoon, welcome to Carlsbad. We will all find your visit enjoyable, especially if you come back as a different role. My name is Larry Mitchell. I'm Vice President of the Board of Directors of the Carlsbad Department of Development. And I'm here to speak on behalf of the Executive Director, also President of the Board. But in response to your resolution, in response to your proposed legislation, I offer the following. Whereas an estimated 44% of New Mexico's general operating fund and over 90% of New Mexico's severance tax funding for capital projects comes from revenues derived from minerals produced as a result of hydraulically fractured wells. And whereas over 100,000 New Mexican jobs are produced by the strong oil and gas industry expansion. Whereas New Mexico is already leading the effort to ensure that we have a sound and safe framework for resource development. And whereas the result, currently safe and responsible development is boosting the state's economy. It's supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs in the energy sector and its suppliers, and it's helping to drive a rebirth in our country's manufacturing. And whereas the net result from an unnecessary and overly burdensome increase in flaring restrictions would effectively kill a major New Mexico industry and all of the related investments being made in the state by causing companies to move across the state line to the Delaware Basin in Texas. We recognize that a one-size-fits-all approach to the regulation of geographically and geologically diverse resource will not work. Developing a one-size-fits-all approach to regulations such as flaring is unscientific, it's unnecessary, and it's going to endanger our growing New Mexico oil and gas industries. And whereas rules that might impose a low cap on gas within the flaring, such that even small producing wells are being stopped, create a danger for the workforce. Yes, I hear you wrong. Anyway, in conclusion, in conclusion, we resolved that unless there's scientifically, there's a valid, or clear and present danger to the health of the citizens of the state of New Mexico that can be demonstrated conclusively, the Carlsbad Department of Development strongly encourages the above mentioned leadership of the state of Mexico to refrain add an additional flare into the air quality restrictions that would make us less competitive in the state of Texas in the attraction of permanent, economically beneficial jobs and infrastructure investment.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Is there Francis Gonzalez here? Okay, so next up we have Steve West, Angie Ross, and Christina Maurice.
Hello, my name is Steve West. I want to thank you all for coming here today. My great-grandfather moved to Carlsbad and called Eddie in the 1890s. I was born here, I grew up here, I graduated from high school here. And after serving in the Army, I returned. I know towns change, and certainly Carlsbad and Eddy County have changed drastically in the last 5 years. I came here to talk to you about the health issue, even though there's a lot that could be talked about here. But the health issue impacts everyone here. It includes oil field workers, it includes retired people, it includes a baby that was just born today at the hospital. And it's something that they have to deal with, and it's something that we've been having to deal with here for a long time. Carlsbad has been evaluated and exceeding EPA ozone levels. Methane is now something we have to deal with. All of this impacts everyone, not just the oil field, but everyone who breathes the air here or likes to go out in the sun. It affects every single person that's in this room and every single person in southeast New Mexico. Well, we're undergoing a population boom right now, but I have to ask myself, what is it that we're losing? Many people who have lived here their whole lives are leaving. Ozone concerns and methane are part of what is driving them out. In addition, of course, to the infrastructure problems, which seems like we're just now getting started on some of them. Without our health, we're only counting the days down until we're no longer here. It should be a prime concern for everything that we do as a society. I hope that one of the things that you will do is you will check with the medical community to determine the what I think are rising incidences of asthma, cancers, respiratory attacks, immune system problems, things that negatively affect children's development and neurological and brain development, premature death, and so many other issues. I think a study of this will be eye-opening. I encourage you to move forward on issues dealing with methane and ozone issues and infrastructure. You used the phrase slow and steady. While some speakers held issue with that, people's lives are at risk if you don't do something about this quickly.
Thank you, Mr. West. Is Angie Ross still here? Or Christina Maurice? Chris Romero? Then Penny Coyne? And I think it's Aaron Ina?
Thank you. It's Chris Romer. I'm a former state senator in Colorado, longtime fan of the land of enchantment. I'm here today just to ask, first to thank you for your growth mindset, your curiosity, your willingness to go slow, to go fast. It is hard to serve the public good. Thank you for the religious community to raise us up, to have a little higher aspiration to why we show up every day on this planet. So you talked a little bit about innovation today. This is what innovation looks like. This is a device that opens up, smells for the air every 2 minutes, reports to the cloud 50 minutes, can be put anywhere on the planet. This is a birdhouse, and in addition to it, it provides a little bit of habitat for sparrows and for bluebirds. It is very hard, and I thought it was very telling today when the representative asked, does anybody want to leave methane in this room? The problem is, it's like you're running a fire department without a smoke detector. You wake up every day with your LDAR team and say, wait, we got 1,000 wells. I talked to one director at 1,000 wells and 2 people and 2 floor cameras. They can do 8 a day. What if you woke up every morning and you knew exactly which wells were leaking? And I'm not here just to produce and to sell or to tell you about the canaries. And by the way, for the elected officials in the room, as a former elected official, be careful what you wish for. When you've got to be an elected official, you'd be out selling birdhouses. what I wanted to say is we can do better. We can do better collaboratively on all of us. These are the cleanest molecules on the planet. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for the hard work that you do. But we absolutely can do this together with innovation, esprit de corps. Finally, how many people in the room know what frac focus is on fluids? The industry took on the issue collaboratively on frac focus and said, we can solve this with transparency and data. Let's use data, let's use science. Let's go out and put these or something like it or somebody else on every pad in this county and let's look at the data collaboratively and we can do this together. I'm just here to help because, doggone it, I am the last Democrat for fracking in Colorado and I believe it. And I believe in you. But you know, we can do better together and we'd love to do it with transparency and data. Thank you very much.
Penny, you ready?
My name is Penny, and I live right across from oil and gas fracking rigs here in Carlsbad. I'm a mother of a 10-year-old and a 17-year-old. I am very concerned about my children's health and their future. Our life is a story of before and after. Before the oil rigs came to be across from our home, I could sit outside and wait for the children to come home, watching the birds in the trees. After the rigs came, I sat outside. I got blisters on my mouth and nose while waiting for my daughter's bus. And I noticed that birds had fallen dead out of my trees. The only difference I could see was the oil rigs. Before the oil rigs, my son was well. But since the oil rigs came, he suffers from severe nosebleeds 2 or more times a week. And even after having his nose cauterized, he still suffers. But since he turned 17, I sent him to school in Roswell, and his nose cleared up. But when he comes home on weekends, his nose gushes again. I wonder what is coming out of these production sites. What are the long-term health effects? I would like to have more monitoring near these sites. I would like to know what is emitted. I would like more regulations and accountability from outside of these producers. I would like for outside regulations. At one point, they shut the first rig down and it was quiet for a while. Now they drilled 2 new ones and things are worse than ever before. Traffic with large trucks is also a major problem and concern. Our family has had 3 accidents in 2 years and lost 3 cars because of oil and field traffic. Our road is a 30-mile-an-hour street and trucks come over the hill doing up to 60 miles an hour. My biggest concern is that my family is growing up here and this is their home and we cannot choose our neighbors. I just want to feel safe in our home. I want to know that my kids are safe and that our neighbors are going to be good, safe, responsible neighbors.
Thank you, Penny. Aaron Jr. So the next few speakers are Robert McIntyre, Missy Curry, and Eve Flanagan. Robert?
Good afternoon, I'm Robert McIntyre with New Mexico Oil and Gas Association. We represent over 1,000 members statewide in the oil and gas industry, both here in southeast New Mexico and in the Northwest. With Sandra, Adrian, Secretaries Props, and Kenny, good to be with you for the 3rd time again. And I just wanted to thank you on behalf of our association. We have many of our members here in attendance today. We appreciate the effort that your departments, your agencies have taken to engage with our industry, to have collaborative conversations, and to really look at this from a very fact and science-based approach. And so we thank you for taking time to come to these communities, to come to Farmington, to come to Carlsbad, to speak with residents who are in both of these areas, and to listen directly from the people who live and work in this industry. So thank you again, and we look forward to continuing our partnership and collaboration with your departments and your agencies.
Good afternoon. My name is Missy Courier, and I am the President and CEO of the Economic Development Corporation of Lee County. We're very grateful for all of you to be here. Like many people in this room, I was born and raised here, and I also have the privilege of being the 7th generation in my family to live in southeastern New Mexico. With that in mind, we appreciate and respect the opportunity for research, data, and innovation to drive the opportunity for conversation between industry, the state, and others who might question what the industry does day in and day out. As we find continued ways to partner together to bring innovation and data, we appreciate the conversation, we look forward to the collaboration, and we also recognize and appreciate what you guys are doing for us while also keeping in mind the need for economic development and diversity. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eve. I know almost nothing about methane, but I'll venture a guess there's not a person here today who cares nothing for the environment or who desires to breathe filthy air. Most of you experts here understand in great depth what it is that the drilling industry is being pushed away from. I'm more concerned about what we're being pushed toward collectively. You know, wind and solar power are great for small draw applications where production and consumption occur at the same place. After decades of research and trial and error, we know, though, that these technologies are not scalable. And if we are forced to rely on them primarily and solely, we're going to be pushed as a civilization back to the dark ages, perhaps literally. I'm concerned about plastic waste. Let's think about the fact it takes 45 tons of non-recyclable plastic to create one wind turbine. Guess where that material comes from? You want to reduce the haze that you see when you're standing on top of the Guadalupes or the organs? Let's get the production of those American cars up and out of Juarez, Mexico, and put it back here in the United States where workers and the air are treated with some ethical standards. But don't listen to me. Let's listen to an expert here. One of the co-authors of the Green New Deal and accused embezzler, Saikat Chakrabarty, laid his cards on the table. He said the interesting thing about the Green New Deal is it wasn't originally a climate thing at all. Do you guys think of it as a climate thing? Because we really think of it as a how do you change the entire economy thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list is Bill Richards, Phelps Anderson, Lindsay Emmons with Eagle, and Clint Core. Bill Richards? No, he's gone? Okay. Anderson. Lindsay McManus?
I'm Clint Cone, Vice President of the Chamber of Commerce and also the Operations Manager for Sendero, Mexico. I was born here in New Mexico too and lived here most of my life. I've also most of my career worked in Texas because of learning incentives for companies to work and produce in New Mexico. That's been changed here lately by the tech programs and other initiatives, and I hope when we're putting this team together to figure out that we get the right people on our panel, so I think we can work this out. But I love living in the state that I'm working in, and I will stay here in the state. So thank you all.
Is John Blackman, Edward Rodriguez, and Abraham Sanchez in the room? All right, so we're going to go to Kyle Armstrong, Ron Connix, Catherine Brown.
Good afternoon. I'm Kyle Armstrong from Roswell, New Mexico with Armstrong Energy Corporation. We're a small producer. I'm also the president of the Independent Petroleum Association of New Mexico. And in that role, I just want to acknowledge Secretary Coast and Kenny for really engaging our membership, a range of small independent operators to the very large independent operators. And we very much appreciate and want to acknowledge the input that we've been able to have with this process. As an operator, I just want to comment quickly. The discussion around technology and innovation, as a former attorney who worked with venture capital firms and high-tech startups, I think it's a phenomenal opportunity for us. As part of the regulatory process, I do want to sound a note of caution. A lot of the technologies are aspirational, things we should work towards. I do want to make sure the regulations for the small operator, when they come into place, are based on things that are real now when they come into place. They're scalable, that an operator of our size can really meet. I think it's an opportunity to drive innovation, but when those rules come into place, the rule needs to make sense with the technology that exists at that point, and we can work up from that. But again, thank you all for coming down here and for all the input that you've taken from everybody here.
Hi, my name is Rod Horrocks. I'm the Chief of Resources at the park. That's Natural and Cultural Resources, Carlsbad Caverns National Park. I wanted to get up to tell you a little bit about our air quality program that we have. We have a very robust program at the park. And the reason we have this program is we're protecting 32,000 acres of wilderness. We're also managing what's arguably the greatest show cave in the world, Carlsbad Caverns, and as well as the biggest wild cave in the world, that's a real cave. About 2 years ago, we brought in what's called an improved station. We are basically trying to determine the sources chemical species that are present in our air, what those sources are. We've done a VOC study at the park. We're also getting ready to put in a permanent ozone, as well as NOx monitoring station. We've been monitoring ozone at the park for about 6 years now. And right now, we've brought an entire air quality lab to the park. And we're doing a special 6-week study where we're looking at everything that could be monitored in air quality. So we have this robust program. We are interested in collaborating and working and sharing our data with others. I just wanted to let you know we have that program. Thank you.
So we don't have an Edward Rodriguez or an Abram Sanchez or a John Blackman in the room. There's an Aaron Pishful. Okay, I'm just going to say Aaron P. Aaron P. Are you in the room? Okay. How about Rob Watchter or Greg Maxey? Uriel Rosales.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Uriel Rosales and I come from Las Cruces, New Mexico. She's...
Hi, my name is Carla Agua and I'm from Walton, New Mexico.
And we're both members of the New Mexico team. It is important to say that New Mexico's economy has grown thanks to the oil and gas industry. It has also helped develop new jobs and fund children's education. However, the industry continues to grow and we must find ways to use our oil and gas resources more wisely. It is about respecting our land and environment. As New Mexicans, we know that the use of natural resources should be done in a respectful manner, and it must have a balance between economic growth and community well-being. Without the healthy environment, our family's health will then be jeopardized along the success of our state. We know that there has been some actions done from companies to reduce methane emissions, but unfortunately, this is just a fraction of the overall industry. That is why all New Mexico's oil and gas producers should follow the same common sense standards, and as well as the use of technology that limits the amount of methane gas pollution that is leaked, vented, or flared from the oil and gas facilities statewide.
So, as a younger generation, we just want you to know that we understand that according to the PDF Environmental Defense Fund, each year New Mexico oil and gas companies waste around $275 million worth of natural gas, boosting an additional of $43 million in tax royalty that can be used for funding for public education. In enacting strong common sense, making rules will ensure responsibility oil, gas development, and foster new jobs in emerging the methane migration industry. The overwhelming majority of voters in New Mexico across parties agree that oil and gas companies must follow the same standards to limit the methane waste from pollution. This will allow New Mexico to join the ranks of Colorado, Wyoming, Pennsylvania, and Ohio to enact the solution, striking a more perfect win for the environment and economy of the state.
Greg Maxey? And all right, so Anthony Cook. Do you have Anthony Cook?
Hi, so I'm Anthony. First off, I'd like to say thank you for your concern and diligence in addressing the issue and allowing us to speak. I'm a concerned lifelong resident of Carlsbad as well as a concerned public health professional, and I completely support the oil and gas industry, but believe methane is a major health concern for those working in the industry and their families. I also believe it has negatively impacted traditional industry in southeast New Mexico, such as agriculture and dairy. The issue affects us all in ways that we don't fully understand, and I think it's important that we are not reactive but proactive in preventing harm. This means working to prevent negative impacts in the future and looking at current and past exposure on residents and the health impacts that occurred due to exposure. According to the Environmental Health Project organization, much of the chemical exposure is due to poor flare management and could have long and lasting health effects on community residents. Potential health effects from exposure include eye, throat, nose irritation, increased risk for asthma, respiratory disease, heart attacks, and cancer. Current practices could lead to undue exposure. For example, Eddy County has the highest asthma hospitalization rate for adults than any other county in the state, and the Southeast region has the highest rate of asthma hospitalization discharges among children. So my first question is, if the regulation is designed, is it to protect the health and safety of the industry, or is it to protect workers and residents? Secondly, if you're looking at the impacts of health, who will be your potential partners and what would that scope of health impact assessment look like? Because current exposure has impacted individuals, communities, land, and livestock in ways that we don't understand, and I believe the industry and state should be held responsible for protecting the health and well-being of the land and people who are our most precious resource.
That's all the folks that have signed up to provide public input. I want to remind everybody, though, that if you would like to provide input, you can through our website. The address is on the board back there, or just Google methane New Mexico Environment Department, and it will come up. I also just want to give my gratitude for such a great group. I know not everybody is completely on board with what we want to do, but I appreciate the respect that you showed us and the engagement process today. Thank you very much, and you all have my contact information. Please feel free to contact me.
Just real quick, I just want to add my thanks on behalf of the department and the governor and my colleague Secretary Kenny for coming out and being candid with us, and we look forward to working with you as we move forward. Thank you very much.